Greetings everyone. This is Arcane Paradox. Prepare yourselves for, what if Pomfrey found 118 starvation curses on Harry from Privet Drive and Dursleys sent to Azkaban? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Diagnostic. The Great Hall smelled like it always did at the start of term, roast chicken and candle wax and that particular brand of nervous energy that came from 500 students trying to pretend they weren't nervous. Ghosts drifted between the house tables. The enchanted ceiling churned with late August cloud, gray and heavy, threatening rain that never quite arrived. First years sat rigid with terror at the prospect of the sorting. Everyone else sat rigid with the comfortable, practiced terror of returning to a place that was home and institution simultaneously. Harry Potter sat at the Gryffindor table and ate 4 full plates of food. Ron watched him do it with a kind of reverent silence, the way you'd watch someone survive something. Hermione watched too, but her eyes were doing that thing where they tracked and catalogued and filed everything away for later examination. Neither of them said anything about it. They'd both seen Harry on platform 9 3/4, the sharpness of his collarbones through his shirt, the way his school robes hung off him like he was a coat rack, the translucent quality of his skin that made him look less like a person and more like a sketch of one. "You all right?" Ron said, finally, because Ron's threshold for silence was approximately 6 minutes. "Better now," Harry said, and meant it entirely about the chicken. Hermione opened her mouth, caught Ron's look, and closed it again. Whatever she'd been going to say went back into the box she kept things in. For now. The sorting happened. Dumbledore stood and spoke, his voice warm and carrying, that particular headmasterly tone that made everything sound like wisdom even when it was just information about curfew. Harry watched him from under his fringe and felt the familiar complicated knot that lived in his chest whenever he looked at Dumbledore, gratitude and unease twisted together so thoroughly he'd stopped trying to separate them. The feast ended. The prefects herded the first years away. Harry climbed the stairs to Gryffindor Tower on legs that felt strange and heavy, and fell into his 4-poster bed and slept for 11 hours without dreaming. The notice went up 3 days into term. Mandatory health diagnostics. By order of the Department of Magical Health and Educational Standards, all students will report to the hospital wing on their assigned date for a full-spectrum diagnostic assessment. Attendance is compulsory. Signed, Madame Poppy Pomfrey, School Healer. What's a full-spectrum diagnostic? Harry asked, reading it over Ron's shoulder. Mum's had them done, Ron said. They scan you for curses, hexes, potions residue, structural damage to your magical core, the whole lot. Takes about 20 minutes. Structural damage to your magical core, Harry repeated. It's usually nothing, Hermione said, already turning away toward the stairs. Ministry mandated it after that outbreak of compulsion jinxes at Beauxbatons. They're rolling it out across all European wizarding schools this year. Precautionary. She paused on the first step and looked back at him. It's nothing, Harry. He wasn't sure which of them she was reassuring. His appointment was Thursday afternoon. He went alone, which in retrospect was the only mercy in any of it, that Hermione and Ron had morning slots and were in charms by the time Harry pushed open the hospital wing doors at 2:30. It smelled of dittany and clean linen. The afternoon light came through the tall windows at a low slant, casting everything in that particular early autumn gold that made even institutional spaces look warm. There were no other patients. Madame Pomfrey was waiting at her desk, wand already in hand, her expression brisk and efficient in that way she had, not unkind, never unkind, but professionally contained. Potter. Sit on that bed, please. Harry sat. Shirt off. He complied without thinking about it, which was maybe why he didn't catch her expression fast enough. He'd learned a long time ago not to be precious about the physical stuff. Healers needed to see, so you let them see. He pulled his shirt over his head and tossed it on the bed beside him and waited, running through the Transfiguration essay he still owed McGonagall in his head. The silence lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then Pomfrey said, very quietly, "Oh." Harry looked up. She was staring at his torso with the focused, terrible stillness of someone who has just understood something they cannot ununderstand. Her wand hand had dropped slightly. Her other hand had pressed itself flat against the surface of her desk. "What?" Harry said. She didn't answer immediately. She lifted her wand again, and her lips moved in the incantation for the diagnostic, Revello Sanitatum, and the spell rolled out of her wand in a soft cascade of pale blue light, washing over him from crown to foot. Then the results began to appear. Pomfrey was an experienced woman. 31 years as Hogwarts school healer. She'd set bones that had been vanished, repaired cursed wounds, extracted 4 different varieties of experimental Weasley products from various student digestive systems. She had, on 2 separate occasions, resuscitated students who had stopped breathing. She had a constitution like iron and a clinical detachment she'd spent 3 decades building. The scroll of diagnostic results that materialized in the air before her was longer than her arm. She read it once, quickly, and then she sat down. "Madam Pomfrey?" Harry said. "Don't move," she said. Her voice had changed. The professional crispness was still there, but underneath it something had cracked open, something warm and furious that she was containing only by a very determined exercise of will. "Don't move, and don't speak for a moment." Harry stayed very still. She read the scroll again. Slowly this time. Her lips moved in places. In other places, they pressed together until they went white. When she reached the bottom, she let the scroll roll itself shut and placed it very carefully on the desk beside her, as though it were something that might explode. She looked at Harry. He looked back at her. "I'm going to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to understand that however you answer, you will not be in trouble. You will not be in any trouble at all. Do you understand?" "Sure," Harry said, which he meant but didn't feel. "Have you been eating this summer?" Harry had been expecting almost any other question. He blinked. "A bit. I mean, I was at my aunt and uncle's, so," he stopped. Something in her face made him stop. "Not as much as I should have," he said, "because Madame Pomfrey was one of those people you found yourself being honest with without quite deciding to be. They don't, I mean, they've never really." "How much?" she said. "Specifically?" "I don't know. 1 proper meal a day, sometimes. Sometimes just what I could. Look, I've been fine, I've had worse." He stopped again. "What's on the scroll?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Harry, have you ever heard of a starvation curse?" The name alone was chilling. "No. They're dark magic. Old, and ugly, and exceptionally difficult to cast, because they require sustained intent. You can't cast one by accident or in anger. You have to mean it, and you have to mean it consistently, over time. What they do is systematically disrupt the body's ability to process nutrition. Food is eaten, but the body cannot absorb it properly. The curse targets the metabolic processes, the bone marrow, the capacity for healthy tissue generation." She paused. They were common in medieval times, used as a form of prolonged execution. They were banned by the International Statute of Magical Limits in 1739 because they were considered a particularly cruel method of. She stopped herself. They are, in short, illegal, dark, and designed to cause suffering over an extended period. Harry's mouth was dry. "Okay. The diagnostic scan has found 118 distinct starvation curses currently active on your person." He heard the number. The number went in through his ears and traveled to his brain, and his brain did something very reasonable with it, which was to simply not process it for approximately 5 seconds. He sat on the edge of the hospital bed in the slanting afternoon light, and he looked at Madame Pomfrey, and he thought, distantly, "That's a lot." 118, she said. "The oldest ones appear to have been cast approximately 10 years ago. Some of them, the earlier ones, have calcified. The curse damage has become structural. It's part of your bone density now, part of your tissue. There are more recent castings layered over them. Some appear to have been cast as recently as this past summer. Harry said nothing. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Someone's been, for 10 years, he stopped. The number 118 kept surfacing. He pushed it back down. It came back up. All my life, he said, slowly. Since I was about 4 or 5. Which is when I was at, I've always lived with my aunt and uncle. Since I was a baby. Since my parents, he stopped again, because his voice had done something unexpected, and he needed a moment to find it again. Yes, Pomfrey said, very gently. My aunt doesn't have magic, Harry said. His voice was entirely level. He was vaguely proud of that. Neither does my uncle. They're muggles. I know. So how, that, she said, is an extraordinarily good question. She stood. She had the look of someone who has just made a very large decision and is already moving. I need you to stay here. I'm going to cast a second diagnostic, a tracing diagnostic. It will attempt to identify the magical signature of the individual or individuals who cast these curses. She picked up her wand. And then I need to make some flu calls. Who are you calling? She looked at him with that same steady gaze, and he understood that she was choosing her words with precision. I'm going to call the people who are required to be called when something like this is discovered. And then, she said, I am going to call the people who should have been called a very long time ago. The tracing diagnostic took 45 minutes. Harry sat on the hospital bed the entire time, wrapped in a blanket Pomfrey had produced without asking, which told him he looked cold, which meant he was probably in mild shock, which was a reasonable response to the situation, he supposed. He watched the spellwork fill the air around him with pale luminescence, threads of it reaching and searching, and he thought about nothing useful. He thought about the summer just ended. He thought about the kitchen at Privet Drive and the size of his portions compared to Dudley's. He thought about being 7 years old and discovering that if he volunteered to weed the garden immediately after dinner he could sometimes steal an apple from the tree by the back wall without Vernon noticing. He thought about being 9 and sick with fever and Vernon telling Petunia that if it wasn't serious enough to go to hospital then it wasn't serious enough for them to deal with, and lying in his cupboard under the stairs for 3 days sweating through his sheet. He did not think about the number 118. He'd put that somewhere else for the moment. He'd deal with it later. The diagnostic finished. A second scroll appeared, this one smaller. Pomfrey took it to her office. Harry heard the flue activate. The first voice through the fire, sharp and immediate, was McGonagall. Are you absolutely certain, Poppy? I have run the diagnostic twice and I will run it a third time if anyone requires it, Minerva. I am entirely certain. 118. Yes. A silence. Then McGonagall said something in a very low voice that Harry couldn't quite make out, but which had the unmistakable sound of someone saying something they had needed to say for a very long time to no one in particular. Then, I'm coming down. The second flue call lasted longer. He caught fragments, ministry and mandatory reporting and at one point 10 years in a tone of absolute, controlled devastation. When Pomfrey emerged from her office, her expression had the quality of something forged under extreme pressure. Hardened. Decided. McGonagall is coming, she said. We're going to need to send word to Albus. She sat down in a chair beside his bed. How are you doing? Fine, Harry said automatically. She looked at him. It's a lot to take in, he amended. But I'm fine. I want to know what happens next. That's mostly what I'm thinking about. She seemed to understand that this was true and also not the complete truth and that pressing for the complete truth right now would not help either of them. What happens next is the standard magical law enforcement protocol for the discovery of dark curse use on a minor. It triggers an automatic investigation. Magical child protection will be involved. Given the nature of the curses, she stopped. Given the nature of it, there will likely also be Auror involvement. The Dursleys are going to be questioned. Yes. Harry nodded. He turned the idea over in his mind. Vernon, sitting across from an oar. Petunia, being asked to explain herself. He felt something shift in his chest, not quite satisfaction, not quite grief. Something unnamed and complicated. They're going to say they didn't know, he said. They don't have magic. They can't have cast these curses themselves. No, Pomfrey said. They can't. He caught something in her voice. But someone cast them. The tracing diagnostic identified magical signatures on approximately 60 of the curses, the ones that haven't calcified beyond recovery. The signatures are partial. Degraded by time. But they exist. She folded her hands in her lap. And whoever cast them had access to you, repeatedly, over a period of years. Likely at or near Privet Drive. Harry's brain worked through the implications of this with the same methodical focus he brought to chess problems or Quidditch strategy. Someone magical. Someone with repeated access to him over years. Someone who had stood near enough to a child to cast a curse on them, 118 times. That's not my relatives, he said quietly. No, Pomfrey agreed. It's not. The hospital wing doors opened and McGonagall came through them at speed, her robes snapping around her legs, her face an architecture of controlled fury that Harry had only ever seen her direct at Umbridge or Slytherin's cheating at Quidditch. She saw Harry and something in her expression wavered for just a moment, the fury cracked and something raw showed through, and then the control snapped back into place with the precision of someone who had been in crises before and knew that composure was the tool that got things done. Harry, she said. Are you in any pain? No, he said. Madame Pomfrey explained, the curses suppressed the symptoms as well as causing the damage. I've just always been, he stopped. He'd been about to say small and realized the word suddenly felt different than it used to. Not a neutral description. Something done to him. I've just always been this way, he finished. McGonagall stood at the foot of his bed and looked at him with the expression of someone conducting a reckoning. The headmaster needs to be informed, she said to Pomfrey. I know, Pomfrey said. He will want to be the one to, I know, Pomfrey said again, and her voice had something in it that made McGonagall stop. I intend to inform him, Minerva. I also intend to report to Magical Child Protection and the Auror Office simultaneously and immediately, which means that whatever the headmaster may wish to manage about the situation, he will not have the opportunity. This is a mandatory report. It is no longer within anyone's discretion to handle quietly. The silence stretched. Poppy, McGonagall said softly. Are you saying, I'm saying, Pomfrey replied, meeting her colleague's eyes steadily, that I have spent 31 years at this school watching this child come back from that house every summer thinner and more damaged, and I documented it and I treated the surface symptoms, and I was told, every time, that the protections at that house were essential and the situation was being managed. Her voice was level. It was the most frightening thing Harry had ever heard from her, that absolute levelness. I am done being told that. Nobody spoke. Harry looked at Pomfrey and felt, for the first time in his memory, the specific sensation of someone being comprehensively, unconditionally angry on his behalf. Not at him. Not disappointed by him. Not managing him or minimizing him or explaining why the situation was necessary. Just angry. For him. It was so unfamiliar it took him a moment to identify it. Okay, he said, into the silence. Both women looked at him. I mean, okay. Do what you need to do. He looked at Pomfrey. All of it. Don't, whatever you'd usually do quietly, don't. I want it all out. He paused. If that's all right. It is more than all right, Pomfrey said. It is entirely your right, McGonagall said, and something in her voice went very soft, and Harry looked away because that particular softness from McGonagall was the one he found most difficult to handle. The next few hours moved fast and strange. The flue in Pomfrey's office lit up and stayed lit. Voices came through in clusters, official voices, formal and careful, and then the ministry's standard issue alarm klaxon tone of someone discovering something they couldn't immediately classify. The Auror dispatcher who received the mandatory report read back the curse count twice, clearly convinced it had been transmitted incorrectly, and then went quiet in the particular way of someone speaking to a supervisor. Dumbledore came at 6 o'clock. Harry heard him before he saw him, that measured footfall, unhurried even now, and then the tall figure moving through the hospital wing doors and stopping at the sight of Harry sitting cross-legged on the bed with a cup of Pomfrey's restorative tea in both hands. "Harry," Dumbledore said. His voice was very gentle. "Headmaster," Harry said. He'd spent the last hour deciding how he was going to have this conversation, and what he decided was that he was going to be honest, and he was not going to make it easier for anyone. "Did Madame Pomfrey tell you the number?" "She did." 118, Harry said. "In case you wanted to say it out loud." "I found it helped, sort of. To just say it." Dumbledore moved to the chair beside his bed, the same chair Pomfrey had vacated, and sat. His blue eyes, usually lit with that particular twinkling warmth, were simply tired. Old. Harry saw, for the first time, not the most powerful wizard alive but a very old man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had perhaps just understood that the thing he was carrying was not his to carry. "I owe you," Dumbledore began. "You don't have to make a speech," Harry said. "Not rudely. Just clearly. I don't need a speech right now. I need to know, did you know? Not about the curses specifically, but, did you know it was bad there?" The silence was long enough to be its own answer. "I knew it was difficult," Dumbledore said. I convinced myself that difficult was survivable. That the protection the blood wards offered was worth," he stopped. "I made a calculation." "You chose," Harry said. "Yes. You chose to leave me there." "Yes." The word fell like something heavy. "And I was wrong." Harry looked at him for a long moment. He felt the anger there, sitting in his chest like a banked fire, and he made the decision, not to suppress it, not to perform forgiveness he didn't have, but to simply hold it. Let it be real. Let the man across from him see it. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not angry," Harry said. "Because I am. But I'm also," he thought about it. "I want to know who cast the curses. That's what I want to know most. Because it wasn't my aunt and uncle. And you placed me with them. So someone with access to me." He watched Dumbledore's face very carefully. "You don't look surprised by that." "I am not," Dumbledore said, "entirely surprised." "Do you know who it was?" "I have," Dumbledore said, carefully, "a suspicion. Which I will share with the investigation team. All of it. Everything I know." He looked at Harry over his half-moon spectacles. "I promise you that." "Okay," Harry said. He believed it, which was the complicated thing about Dumbledore. Harry could be furious with him and believe him simultaneously. "Then we'll see." The Aurors arrived at 8. Two of them, Kingsley Shacklebolt, who Harry knew from the Order, and a woman Harry hadn't met before, introduced as Senior Auror Daphne Reeves, who had the quiet, watchful quality of someone who had seen many things and catalogued all of them. She was the head of the Dark Curse Crimes Unit. She had, Kingsley told Harry in an undertone, personally prosecuted some of the most significant Dark Curse cases of the last decade. She looked at the diagnostic scroll for a long time. "This is the original," she asked Pomfrey. "Signed and dated." "I ran a second." "Both are there." Reeves rolled the scroll up with the care of someone handling evidence. Because that was what it was now. Evidence. "Mr. Potter." She sat down across from him, elbows on knees, no clipboard or quill, just her full attention. "I want to talk to you about what you remember of your summers at your relative's home. As much or as little as you're comfortable sharing tonight. We can do more tomorrow, and the day after that. There's no rush. I want to go through it now, Harry said. He paused. While it's what? While it's the most present it's ever been in his mind, the numbers and the anger in Pomfrey's face when she read the scroll. I'd rather do it now. Reeves nodded once. All right. She was a good interviewer. She asked straight questions and let him answer without guiding him toward answers she'd already decided on. Harry talked for an hour and a half, about the cupboard under the stairs, about the food portions, about the meals he'd missed and the ones he'd stolen and the locked refrigerator and the chores and the casual, practiced way the Dursleys had of making him understand that he was less than them in a way that had nothing to do with arguments or speeches. It was simply the architecture of that house. The shape of it. Harry in the walls, in the margins, in the locked cupboard, in the too small portions and the hand-me-down clothes 3 sizes too large. He told it plainly. He didn't perform sadness and he didn't perform defiance. He just told it, the way you'd describe the geography of a place you'd lived in long enough to know all its features. Reeves wrote nothing down. She remembered it all. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you. That's very thorough." She stood. "We'll be executing a warrant at number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, at approximately," she checked her watch. "Now, actually. The team is already in position." She glanced at Kingsley, who gave a small nod. "The residents of that address will be brought in for questioning before midnight." Harry absorbed this. What happens to them? That depends on what the investigation establishes. Reeves met his eyes. If the curses were cast by someone else and your relatives were unaware, that's one thing. If there is evidence that they were aware, or complicit, or that they facilitated access to you by whoever was casting them, she let the sentence end itself. "What's the maximum?" Harry said. "If they were complicit. What's the maximum sentence for something like this? For dark curse use on a child, sustained over a decade?" Reeves said. "Azkaban. A long sentence in Azkaban." The word sat in the room. Harry thought about Vernon's face. About Petunia's thin, pursed mouth. About Dudley's satisfaction at Harry's diminishment, not cruel exactly, more like the satisfaction of a child who has absorbed the lesson that some people simply matter less. He thought about all of it and he felt the anger, and underneath the anger he felt something else, something very tired and very old and very sad for the child who had lived in those walls and made himself smaller and smaller and smaller to fit the space he'd been given. "Okay," he said. He drank the rest of his tea. Outside the high windows of the hospital wing, the August night was dense and dark, and somewhere in Little Whinging, Surrey, Aurors in dark robes were knocking on the door of a perfectly ordinary house on a perfectly ordinary street in the world that house had created. The careful, deliberate, magically enforced world of Harry Potter's smallness, was ending. He sat up straight on the hospital bed. His shoulders were back. He noticed, dimly, that the posture felt unfamiliar and good. Pomfrey appeared at his elbow with a second cup of tea and what turned out to be an entire plate of sandwiches. "Eat," she said. He did. All of them. While the flue burned and voices moved through it and the machinery of justice, slow and imperfect and long overdue, began, finally, to move. At 10 o'clock, Hermione arrived. She came through the hospital wing doors at speed, Ron a step behind her, both of them still in their school robes with the look of people who had been waylaid by information and had run the entire way. Hermione stopped when she saw the Aurors. She stopped again when she saw Pomfrey's expression. Then she looked at Harry and he could see her doing what she always did, which was to read every available variable simultaneously and produce a conclusion. "What happened?" she said. "Not a question." "Sit down," Harry said. "Both of you." "I'll tell you." Ron sat immediately, the way he always did when Harry said sit down in that particular tone. Hermione sat more slowly, watching Harry's face the whole time. He told them. He told them the number first because there was no point dancing around it, and he watched Hermione's face go through 5 distinct expressions in 4 seconds: shock, comprehension, horror, rage, and then something very still and very cold that he hadn't seen from her before and filed away as important. Ron's response was simpler and more immediate. His ears went red. His jaw went tight. He looked at the floor, looked at the ceiling, and then looked at Harry with an expression that was so direct it was almost hard to hold. "Good," Ron said. "Good that they found it. Good that it's—" He stopped. His voice had gone rough. "Sorry. It's fine," Harry said. "It's not," Ron said. "It's the opposite of fine. He stopped again, and seemed to decide that words were insufficient, and instead just moved and sat next to Harry on the bed and put a hand on Harry's shoulder, which was a more typically Hermione thing to do, which meant Ron had gone well past his usual emotional vocabulary into somewhere deeper. Harry didn't shake it off. Hermione was still very quiet. Her hands were folded in her lap and she was thinking. Harry could see her thinking, see the framework being built. "The curses," she said finally, her voice precise and careful. "Were they cast by the Dursleys?" "No. They're muggles." "So someone magical. Someone with access to you at Privet Drive." "That's what Aurora Reeve said." Repeatedly, Hermione said. "Over 10 years. Someone who could get close enough to a child at a muggle address without arousing suspicion or triggering." She looked up sharply. "The Blood Wards." Harry nodded slowly. "Someone who wouldn't have been stopped by the Blood Wards," she said. "Which means, either someone who belongs to my family's bloodline," Harry said, "which means a blood relative. Or someone who was let through." The room went quiet enough to hear the fire in Pomfrey's office. "Let through," Hermione repeated. "By whom?" Nobody answered, because the answer was in the room with them, in the shape of the choices that had been made, in the architecture of a 10-year arrangement that had kept Harry exactly where someone wanted him. "We're going to figure it out," Hermione said. It wasn't a comfort. It was a statement of fact, quiet and absolutely certain, like a door closing. "All of it. We're going to figure out every part of it." Harry looked at his 2 best friends, Ron's hand still warm and steady on his shoulder, Hermione's eyes lit with the specific and terrifying focus she brought to things that mattered to her, and he thought that whatever came next, whatever the investigation turned up, whatever fights were coming with whoever had done this to him, he was not going to face it from the cramped, surviving posture he'd carried his whole life. He straightened his back again. The motion came easier this time. "Yeah," he said. "We are." Chapter 2, The Reckoning. The Wizengamot chamber smelled like old stone and older arguments. Harry had been here before, the summer before 5th year, hauled in for underage magic use, made to sit in that enormous chair with chains that hadn't moved but had threatened to, facing a full circle of wizards and witches who had already decided what they thought. He'd won that time, barely, with Dumbledore doing most of the heavy lifting. He remembered how small the chair had made him feel. How the chamber's architecture was designed specifically to make whoever sat in it feel like an ant on a plate. He felt no such thing today. He sat straight in the chair, the same chair, the chain still coiled at its base, and looked around the tiered gallery of Wizengamot members with the calm of someone who knows exactly why they're here and is not afraid of a single person in the room. Beside him, not at the council table but actually beside him, sat Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, who had agreed to serve as his legal advocate with the efficiency of someone who had reviewed the diagnostic scroll and then made exactly one phone call to clear her calendar. She had met Harry this morning in the ministry atrium and shaken his hand and said, "I've reviewed the evidence. You have nothing to worry about today. Your job is simply to tell the truth." Then she'd straightened her monocle and walked him to the lifts without another word. He liked her immediately. The gallery was packed. Word had moved fast, it always did in the wizarding world, where gossip had the velocity of a firebolt and the penetrating power of a cutting curse. Harry had seen the faces when he walked in. The ripple of it. Whispers running around the upper tiers like fire along a fuse. At the prosecution table sat Aura Reeves, looking exactly as she had last night in the hospital wing, composed, watchful, in possession of a file that Harry suspected could flatten a building. Beside her was a junior Aura Harry didn't know, stacking evidence scrolls with the focused precision of someone who had been told to get this right. And at the witness table, in 3 chairs arranged with the particular cruelty of exposure, sat the Dursleys. Vernon looked like a man whose blood pressure had finally achieved what it had always been threatening to do. His face was a deep, terrible puce, his mustache doing something agitated above his lip. He wore his best suit, which looked profoundly out of place in the stone chamber, and his eyes moved constantly around the room with the desperate, darting quality of someone who keeps expecting a normal authority to appear and make all of this stop. Petunia sat very still. That was what Harry noticed most, her stillness. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face was the color of old bone. She was not looking at the gallery, not at the Wizengamot, not at the prosecution table. She was looking at the floor in front of her feet with an expression Harry couldn't name, something that lived in the complicated space between guilt and long-practiced denial. Dudley wasn't there. Harry had been told he wouldn't be, not a suspect, not yet legally an adult, currently with a social care worker in an anteroom upstairs. Harry wasn't sure how he felt about that. He wasn't sure how he felt about any of it, which was different from being overwhelmed. He'd made peace with the not knowing yet. He'd do the processing after. Right now there was just the room and the work. Cornelius Fudge sat in the Chief Warlock's chair, which should have been Dumbledore's, but Dumbledore had recused himself given his own pending testimony. Fudge was wearing his lime-green bowler hat and an expression of a man who has been told he must drive a vehicle he has never seen before at considerable speed through a city he doesn't know. "We are convened," Fudge said, his voice managing somehow to be both pompous and querulous at once, in emergency extraordinary session of the full Wizengamot to hear the matter of, he looked down at his parchment. The matter of, multiple counts of dark curse use upon a minor, specifically one Harry James Potter, aged 15, and associated counts of, he looked at his parchment again. Sustained abuse and child endangerment, facilitation of dark curse use, and conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm, Reeves supplied, without inflection, in the tone of someone who has been watching a man struggle to read for long enough. Fudge's mustache did something defensive. Yes. That. Reeves went first, because she was a professional and this was her case and she presented it the way she did everything, without theater, without embellishment, with the specific devastating efficiency of pure fact. She laid out the diagnostic results. She brought Pomfrey in via a prepared statement. Pomfrey herself was at Hogwarts, but the statement had her signature and her healer's seal and the weight of 31 years of documented observation. She presented the timeline of the curses, the calcification evidence, the degraded but present magical signatures on 60 of the 118. She described, in clinical and therefore somehow more terrible language, what a starvation curse does to a developing body. The metabolic disruption. The bone density implications. The suppression of the body's own hunger signal so that the victim does not feel the full extent of their deprivation, which means the deprivation goes undetected and unchallenged. The cumulative effect across 10 years on a child whose magical core was simultaneously developing. The chamber was very quiet. Harry watched the Wizengamot members as Reeves spoke. Some of them he recognized. Most he didn't. What he watched for was the ones who weren't shocked, the ones whose stillness had a different quality, a managed quality. He found 3. Filed them away. The residents of number 4, Privet Drive, Reeves continued, were taken in for questioning last night. Vernon Dursley and Petunia Dursley, née Evans. Both Muggle. Neither possessing magical ability. She paused. Preliminary questioning has established the following. She described the food rationing. She described the cupboard under the stairs. There was a specific, audible reaction from the gallery at this, the sound of 200 people processing the same image simultaneously. She described the systematic isolation, the documented evidence of malnutrition, the fact that Harry's growth had been so significantly impacted by the combined effect of the curses and the physical deprivation that their healing team estimated he was currently 5 to 7 centimeters shorter than his natural height and roughly 14 kilograms below a healthy baseline for his age and bone structure. The Dursleys, Reeves said, claimed to have been unaware of any magical element to their treatment of the subject. They claim, and here her voice did something subtle, a fractional shift that communicated volumes without a single editorializing word, that they believed Harry Potter was simply a troublesome child who required firm handling. Firm handling, someone said from the gallery. Not loudly, but clearly enough that the chamber heard it. Fudge rapped his gavel without much conviction. Order. The charge of facilitation, Reeves said, relates not to the casting of the curses, which physical evidence eliminates the Dursleys as having performed, but to the environment they maintained, which we submit provided ideal conditions for the curse caster to operate over an extended period with zero interference and zero reporting. The subject had no advocate, no access to magical health services, no contact with the wider wizarding community during summer months, and was systematically discouraged from seeking outside help. She let this sit for a moment. This did not happen by accident. These conditions were maintained deliberately. Amelia Bones leaned toward Harry and murmured, "This is the strongest part of her argument. Watch the jury." Harry watched. He saw what she meant, the Wisengamot members in the middle tiers, the ones who had been maintaining careful neutrality, were no longer maintaining it. Something had shifted. He'd seen Hermione's face do the same thing last night, that movement from processing to conclusion. The prosecution calls Harry James Potter, Reeves said. Amelia Bones stood, straightening her robes. We have no objection to Mr. Potter's testimony. We would request that the standard protections for minor witnesses be applied, including the right to decline any line of questioning deemed re-traumatizing without penalty or adverse inference. Fudge blinked. Yes, granted. Mr. Potter. Harry stood. He walked to the witness area, a raised platform, not the chains chair, that was for the accused, and sat in the provided chair and looked out at the chamber and waited. The silence, he found, did not bother him. He had the sense that it bothered everyone else considerably more. Mr. Potter, Reeves said. Can you describe your living conditions at number 4, Privet Drive, to the best of your recollection? He could. He did. He spoke for 20 minutes without notes, without prompting, in a clear and level voice that he kept deliberately even, not because he was suppressing anything but because evenness was, he had decided, more powerful than emotion here. He wanted them to hear the facts. He wanted the facts to do their own work, undiluted. He described the cupboard. He described his first years at Hogwarts and the shock of eating freely. He said this casually, in passing, as a fact rather than an indictment, and he saw from the faces what the casualness of it did. He described the summers. He described the food. He described the systematic small diminishments, the way a house is organized around the message that one person in it matters less than the others, and how you absorb that message whether or not anyone says it out loud, because children are very good at learning the architecture of the space they're given. He did not cry. He did not need to. He described last summer, the one just passed. The locked refrigerator. The specific quality of Vernon's satisfaction when he found reasons to reduce Harry's portions further. The way Petunia moved around him in the kitchen, working around him, not seeing him, with the practiced efficiency of someone who has decided that not seeing is a form of kindness. Last question, Reeves said. In your time at Privet Drive, did any adult, wizarding or otherwise, ever come to check on your welfare? Visit the house? Ask you directly how you were? Harry thought about this honestly, because Reeves deserved honesty and the chamber deserved it. Hagrid had come, once, to deliver his Hogwarts letter, but that was an introduction, not a welfare check. Members of the Order had apparently watched the house, but from the outside. Nobody had come in. Nobody had sat down across from him and said, "How are you actually doing?" "No," he said. "Thank you," Reeves said. Nothing further. The Dursleys' advocate was a ministry-appointed wizard named Bertram Fallowell who had the look of a man deeply regretting his career choices. He was competent, Harry supposed, in the way that someone can be technically competent while being completely overwhelmed by the material they're working with. He asked Vernon to take the stand first. Vernon stood, adjusted his tie, and addressed the chamber with the bluster of a man accustomed to being the largest, loudest presence in any room and finding this room considerably less compliant than expected. "We never knew," Vernon said. His voice was loud and defensive and slightly shaking. "We took the boy in out of the goodness of our hearts when his parents passed, and we raised him alongside our own son and we gave him a home and food and, the subject was housed in a cupboard under the stairs for the first 10 years of his life," Reeves said, from her table, with zero inflection. "He had a perfectly adequate room. The second bedroom of the house was converted to his use in his first year at Hogwarts. Prior to that, the cupboard under the stairs served as his bedroom. This is documented. The physical evidence from the house includes a small mattress, multiple sets of children's clothing in graduated sizes, and a locking mechanism on the outside of the cupboard door." Reeves looked at her file. "Would Mr. Dursley like to explain the locking mechanism?" Fallowell put his hand on Vernon's arm. Vernon sat down. Petunia took the stand next, and she was a more complicated thing to watch. She was controlled in the way that Vernon wasn't, not bluster but compression, everything squeezed down to a tight, contained space. She answered Fallowell's questions briefly and accurately, which made Harry think she had perhaps been more afraid of this moment for longer than Vernon had. She was prepared for it in some way Vernon wasn't. When Reeves stood for cross-examination, Petunia looked at her with the eyes of someone who has been waiting for this particular thing for 20 years. "Mrs. Dursley," Reeves said. "Your maiden name was Evans?" "Yes." "And your sister, Lily Evans, was a witch?" "Yes." "Your nephew, Harry Potter, is your sister's son?" "Yes." "When Harry Potter was left in your care as an infant, you were visited by Albus Dumbledore. Do you recall that visit?" A pause. "Yes." "And Dumbledore explained to you the nature of the blood protection that resided in the house, contingent on Harry being kept there until he came of age?" Another pause, longer. Fallowell started to stand and Petunia's hand came up slightly, a fractional gesture, and he sat back down. "Yes," she said. "He explained it. He told you that Harry needed to be kept at that address. That the magical protection depended on it." "Yes." "Did he, at any point, instruct you on how Harry was to be treated?" The pause this time was long enough to be architectural. It held the entire chamber. Harry stopped breathing without noticing. "He said," Petunia said, very quietly, "that Harry should be kept safe." "Kept safe," Reeves repeated. "And how did you interpret that instruction, Mrs. Dursley?" Petunia looked at her hands. "I kept him alive," she said. The words were so flat, so stripped of anything, that the chamber heard what they actually meant. Not "I kept him safe." Not "I cared for him." Just, "I kept him alive." As though that had been the task, the minimum viable outcome, the bar she had set herself and met without ever asking whether the bar was anywhere near high enough. "Thank you," Reeves said, and her voice was not warm or cold but somewhere in between, somewhere that told you she understood, without approving, and was not done. "One more question. In your time as Harry's guardian, did anyone visit the house? Any magical person, coming specifically to see Harry?" Petunia looked up. Her eyes went briefly, involuntarily to the gallery. Just for a second. Just a flicker. Harry followed the direction of her glance. The gallery was packed and he couldn't immediately identify what she'd looked at. But he noted it. He noted it very carefully and stored it in the same place he kept all the things he intended to understand later. "No," Petunia said. "Nobody came." Harry watched her say it and knew, with the certainty of someone who had spent 15 years reading the specific language of Petunia Dursley's silences, that she was lying. The Wisengamot deliberated for 1 hour and 14 minutes. Harry sat in the anteroom with Amelia Bones, who poured tea from a flask she produced from her robes and offered him a biscuit from a tin that had a picture of kittens on it, which was such a specific and unexpected detail that it made him laugh for the first time all day. She looked pleased by this in a contained, professional way. "What do you think the verdict will be?" he asked. "The evidence is extremely strong," she said. "The Dursleys can't escape the facilitation charge regardless of their professed ignorance. The conditions they maintained are documented. The fact that those conditions allowed sustained dark curse use on a child, intentionally or not, makes them legally liable." She sipped her tea. "The question of who cast the curses is a separate matter that the investigation will continue to pursue." "And the sentence?" She looked at him steadily over her monocle. "If convicted on the primary charges, a custodial sentence in Azkaban is the standard result. The length depends on the Wisengamot's discretion." Harry thought about Azkaban. He'd been thinking about it since last night, turning it over, trying to work out how he felt. He'd spent years wishing, in the dark, private way of children who know their wishes are pointless, that someone would see what that house was and do something about it. Now someone was doing something about it and it felt less like triumph than he'd imagined and more like something settling. Like a very long-held breath being released. "I don't want them to suffer unnecessarily," he said, which surprised him as he said it, but which was also true. I want it to mean something. I want there to be a consequence that means something." Bones nodded. "That's a reasonable thing to want. Is it going to mean something?" She looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said. "It will." The door opened. The Auror outside leaned in. "They're ready." The verdict came in 5 parts. Vernon Dursley, guilty of child endangerment, guilty of facilitation of dark curse use through provision of conditions enabling sustained access, guilty of conspiracy to. The Wisengamot had found enough in the interrogation of Vernon's financial records to add a 3rd charge that Reeves had introduced in the last hour of deliberation. 18 months in Azkaban, suspended after 12 on condition of continued compliance with monitoring. The chamber reacted to this with a mixed sound, some satisfaction, some feeling that it wasn't enough. Harry noticed he agreed with both reactions simultaneously and didn't try to resolve them. Petunia Dursley, guilty on the facilitation charge, not guilty on the conspiracy charge, the evidence there was thinner. 12 months in Azkaban, suspended after 8. Additionally required to submit to magical monitoring and to provide a full account of any magical visitors to the property at Privet Drive during Harry's childhood. The Wisengamot had caught the same flicker in her testimony that Harry had, apparently. The chamber went up in a controlled noise. Not chaos. More like the sound of something long pressurized finding an outlet. Fudge rapped his gavel repeatedly and without much effect. Harry sat in his chair in the witness gallery and felt the sound wash over him. He looked at his hands on his knees. He felt Ron's presence somewhere in the gallery behind him, Hermione too. They'd been allowed in as witnesses for the latter half of proceedings. He hadn't looked back at them. He would in a moment. First he just let himself sit in the specific feeling of the moment, which was not happiness exactly and not relief exactly and not victory, but something simpler than any of those. It was the feeling of having been believed. Of having told the truth about what happened to him in that house and having a room full of people not argue with it, not minimize it, not explain to him why it was necessary or complicated or something he was misunderstanding. Just, believed. Finally, simply, believed. He took a slow breath. Then he turned around and found Ron's face in the gallery, and Ron looked at him with that uncomplicated, fierce expression, and nodded once. "Good," the nod said. "Good." Outside the Wisengamot chamber, in the corridor where the ministry's torches cast everything in moving shadow, the chaos was immediate. Reporters had been waiting. Harry had expected this and prepared for it by perfecting the art of moving at speed while appearing entirely unhurried. Amelia Bones carved a path through them with the ease of long practice, and Harry followed in her wake, not hiding his face, not pulling up his collar. He looked at the reporters directly when they called his name, and said nothing, because Bones had advised him against statements and he trusted her judgment, but he didn't flinch, didn't duck, didn't perform the small-making gestures he'd always defaulted to. Harry. Harry, how do you feel about the verdict? Harry, is it true you were kept in a cupboard? Do you have any comment on the suggestion that Dumbledore, that one made him pause for a half-second? He recovered immediately and kept walking, but the question had landed where the reporter intended it to. He stored it for later, alongside Petunia's glance at the gallery. Hermione caught up with him in the lift. She'd clearly been holding something in for the better part of 4 hours, because she came through the lift doors with the contained energy of a person at maximum capacity, and the first thing she said was, "I've been thinking about the magical signatures." "Hello to you too," Ron said, from behind her. 60 of the curses had degraded but identifiable magical signatures, Hermione said, ignoring this in the way she ignored anything extraneous when she was following a thread. "The investigators will be running those through the Ministry's signature registry. But the registry only has signatures for registered witches and wizards who have been formally wand since 1979. Anyone wand before that, or anyone who, for any reason, isn't in the registry, won't appear." "You're saying the caster might not be in the system," Harry said. "I'm saying they might not be. But I'm also saying," she pressed her lips together, "I've been reading about starvation curses. They're extremely specialized. Dark, old magic. The kind you'd find in books that aren't in the Hogwarts library. You'd have to know where to look. You'd have to have a specific reason for wanting to use them specifically. Because they're insidious," Harry said slowly. "They cause damage that looks like ordinary malnutrition. Unless you're specifically scanning for dark curses, which a standard Muggle doctor wouldn't do," Hermione said. "And which no one ran on you at Hogwarts until the mandatory diagnostic." She met his eyes. "Someone chose those specific curses because they needed the damage to be deniable. They needed you to just look thin. Underfed. Neglected. Not cursed." The lift arrived at the atrium. The doors opened on the enormous space with its golden fountain and its moving floor crowd of ministry workers. Harry stepped out and walked through it and thought about what Hermione had said. Someone had wanted the damage to be deniable. Someone had needed him alive but diminished. Someone had 118 reasons. "We find who cast them," he said. "I'm already looking," Hermione said. "I know you are." He glanced at her sideways, and the thing he felt was not the complicated gratitude of someone being helped despite themselves, but the clean and simple gratitude of someone who has good people. "Thank you." She bumped her shoulder against his arm, which was the Hermione equivalent of a full embrace. "Obviously," she said. Dumbledore was waiting for them in the atrium. Not obviously, he was standing near the fountain, speaking quietly to a wizard Harry didn't recognize, and he might have been there entirely coincidentally. But he wasn't there coincidentally. When Harry came through the lift doors, Dumbledore looked up with the precise timing of someone who had been watching for him. Harry walked over. "The verdict," Dumbledore said. "You know the verdict," Harry said. "You heard it somehow. You always do. Guilty on the primary charges. Azkaban sentences." He said it without apparent surprise, without satisfaction, with the weight of a man who has been doing careful accounting in his head for some time and has arrived at a sum he expected but still finds heavy. "I am glad," he said, "that this day came." "So am I." Harry looked at him steadily. "You said you had a suspicion. About who cast the curses." "I did." "Are you going to tell me?" Dumbledore held his gaze for a long moment. This was the thing about him, even diminished, even accountable, he had the habit of those pauses, the weight of them, as though everything required careful portioning. Harry waited him out with the patience of someone who had learned that Dumbledore's pauses usually ended in truth if you didn't rush them. "I have shared my suspicion with Aura Reeves," Dumbledore said. "I believe the process should." "I'm not asking the process," Harry said. "I'm asking you. You owe me the information directly. Not managed, not filtered, not delivered when you decide the timing is right. He kept his voice even. Directly. The pause this time was different. It had the quality of something giving way. There was someone, Dumbledore said, who had reason to want you weakened. Someone with old enough knowledge to know those curses and the motivation to use them. Someone who believed, incorrectly, that a less powerful Harry Potter would be safer. He stopped. For everyone. On our side, Harry said. You're talking about someone on our side. Dumbledore said nothing, which was all the answer required. Harry stood in the golden atrium of the Ministry of Magic, in the middle of the crowd of moving strangers, and felt something shift in his understanding of the world. Not collapse, he had always known the world was more complicated than the shape people offered you. But shift. The comfortable binary of us and them tilting to reveal the more accurate, more uncomfortable truth that cruelty didn't require a dark mark. It required only motivation and opportunity and the decision that one person mattered less than the goal. The investigation will find them, Harry said. I believe it will. And when it does, Harry looked at Dumbledore with absolute clarity, no performance, no anger management, just the straight, honest communication of someone who has decided he is done accepting less than he deserves. No managing it. No quiet resolution for the greater good. All of it in the open. Dumbledore held his gaze. For a moment the old eyes were just eyes, tired and human and carrying more than they should have, more than anyone should. All of it, he agreed. In the open. Good, Harry said. And walked out of the ministry into the afternoon light. That evening, in the Gryffindor common room, someone had put up a banner. Harry stopped dead when he came through the portrait hole. The common room was full, not artificially full, not organized by anyone, just the natural gathering of people drawn toward something. The banner was scarlet and gold and it said, in Ginny Weasley's characteristically unsubtle lettering, finally. Someone started clapping. Then several people. Then most of the room. Harry stood in the entrance and felt the heat of it, not the reflexive discomfort of being watched, the old shrinking instinct, but something new. Something that felt like being seen and being seen accurately, without exaggeration or reduction. Just the truth of what had happened today, reflected back. He looked at the banner. He looked at the room. Thanks, he said, and meant it. Ginny appeared at his elbow from nowhere, which was a habit of hers he was starting to appreciate. I made it, she said, gesturing at the banner. Ron said you wouldn't hate it. Ron was right. I know. She handed him a bottle of butterbeer. Fred and George sent a crate. They said, and I quote, tell Harry this is the kind of occasion that deserves proper marking. Harry took the butterbeer and thought that was about the most Fred and George thing they could possibly have said, which meant it was exactly right. He sat on the hearth rug. People gathered around without being organized to, Neville, looking at Harry with an expression Harry couldn't quite read but which had something sincere and private in it. Seamus and Dean, who were loud and celebratory in the simple, uncomplicated way of people who care without overthinking. Ginny, cross-legged next to him with the easy familiarity of someone who doesn't need to perform friendship. Ron sat on the other side of him, said nothing, and was the best version of himself. Hermione sat across from them with a book open in her lap and her eyes moving over it in the specific way that meant she was reading and simultaneously thinking about something else entirely. Harry caught her eye once. She gave him a small, private smile, not the celebratory one she offered the room, but the real one, the one that said I'm glad you're okay and I'm still working on it simultaneously. He raised his butterbeer toward her. She raised hers back. Outside the Gryffindor Tower windows, the Scottish night was clear for the first time all week, stars pressing through where the clouds had been. The castle was warm and loud with common room noise. Somewhere in Little Whinging, number 4 Privet Drive sat empty, its perfectly ordinary face offering nothing to the perfectly ordinary street it sat on. Inside Harry Potter, something that had been locked for 15 years was starting, slowly, carefully, to open. Chapter 3, The Fracture. 3 days after the Wisengamot hearing, Dumbledore asked Harry to come to his office. Harry went. He went without Ron offering to come with him, without Hermione pressing a research summary into his hands, without anyone buffering the thing. He went alone, up the moving staircases, past the gargoyle that stepped aside without requiring a password, which told him Dumbledore had set it to recognize him, which told him Dumbledore was trying, which Harry noted without letting it change anything. The office was exactly as it always was. The whirring silver instruments on their spindle legs. The portraits of former headmasters, most of them pretending to be asleep with the transparent enthusiasm of people who very much wanted to watch what happened next. Fawkes on his perch, regarding Harry with one bright eye. And behind the desk, Dumbledore, who looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 days and was doing nothing to hide it. "Sit down, Harry." Harry sat. He looked around the office with the comfortable familiarity of someone who'd been in it under duress enough times that it no longer had the power to intimidate him. His eyes landed on the pensieve, half covered with a velvet cloth. Then on the cabinet beside the window where the Sorting Hat lived. Then back to Dumbledore. "You look terrible," Harry said. "Yes," Dumbledore agreed. "I imagine I do. Are you sleeping?" "Not especially well." He folded his hands on the desk. "How are you?" "Better than you, apparently." Harry leaned back in the chair. "You asked me up here. So whatever you need to say, go ahead and say it." Something moved through Dumbledore's expression, not quite a smile, but something adjacent. The recognition of a Harry he had perhaps always expected to exist but had never quite been allowed to see. "The investigation has progressed," he said. "Reeves contacted me this morning. They have been able to partially reconstruct 4 of the magical signatures from the curses, enough to begin formal identification." He paused. "They have narrowed it to 3 possible individuals, based on the signature profile. All 3 are, or were, members of the Order." Harry heard this and did not react immediately. He had been expecting it since the atrium conversation, had been turning it over for 3 days, so the confirmation landed in prepared ground. "Were," he said. "One of them is dead." "2 of them are dead," Dumbledore said. "So one is still alive?" "Yes." "Who?" The pause. Harry waited it out. "The signature is consistent with someone who was deeply embedded in the original Order," Dumbledore said. "Someone who was, in those early years after Voldemort's first defeat, deeply afraid. Who believed, genuinely believed, that you were the greatest threat remaining. Not Voldemort's threat, your own power. What you might become. What the prophecy suggested you might do." He looked at Harry over his glasses. Someone who decided, very early, that a diminished Harry Potter was the only Harry Potter they could trust. "That's not an excuse," Harry said. "It is not. I present it as explanation only, because you deserve to understand the reasoning even if the reasoning is monstrous." Dumbledore's voice was steady. "The curses were begun when you were 4 years old. The first casting appears to have occurred approximately 6 months after you were placed with the Dursleys. The individual had clearance, granted by me, to check on your welfare periodically. The word welfare sat there in the clean office air like something rotten. You gave someone clearance to visit me at Privet Drive," Harry said. "Someone who used that clearance to curse me." "Yes. Someone whose motivation you've just described as being afraid of my power." "Yes. So they went to the house where you'd placed me. And instead of checking on my welfare, they cursed me to prevent me from being, what? Too powerful." Harry's voice was still even. He was very aware of keeping it even, not as a performance but as a choice. "And then they came back. And cursed me again. And again. 118 times. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Just that one word, carrying all of it. And you," Harry said, "didn't know." The pause this time had a different texture. Harry felt it before Dumbledore spoke, the way you feel a change in air pressure before weather hits. I suspected, Dumbledore said, approximately 3 years in, that something was wrong. That the rate of your magical development in your first years at Hogwarts was anomalous. Lower than it should have been for someone of your lineage. He looked at his folded hands. I had the diagnostic capability. I could have had you scanned. I told myself it was the stress of your circumstances, the adjustment, the loss of your parents. He stopped. I chose not to look too closely. The silence stretched. Because if you'd looked, Harry said, you'd have had to act. And acting would have disrupted the arrangement. Yes. The blood wards. The protection. Keeping me at Privet Drive. Yes. So you didn't look, Harry said, because looking would have been inconvenient for your plan. Harry, I'm not shouting, Harry said, and he wasn't. I'm not angry in a way that needs managing. I'm just stating what happened. You didn't look because looking would have cost you something. And I paid the cost instead. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression of a man receiving a just sentence and having the dignity not to flinch from it. Yes, he said. That is what happened. Okay, Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. I said okay, Harry repeated. Not as in it was okay. As in I understand it, I'm not pretending I don't, and I need you to understand that this changes things between us. I'm not cutting you off. I'm not throwing everything away. You're still the most powerful wizard alive and you're still on the right side of this war and I still need you. But the thing where you make decisions about my life without telling me, he leaned forward slightly. That's done. I need you to understand that's done. I do understand it, Dumbledore said. And I accept it. Who is it? Harry said. The one who's still alive. Who cast the curses? Another pause. Dumbledore. Elphias Doge, Dumbledore said. Harry turned the name over. Old Order member. One of Dumbledore's oldest friends. A man Harry had met exactly twice, at the start of the year, briefly, a smallish wizard with a wheezy voice who'd always given off the air of someone existing primarily in Dumbledore's considerable shadow. Doge, Harry said. He was terrified, Dumbledore said. In those early years. The prophecy, the full text, which he had access to through his closeness to me, he interpreted it as a threat to the wizarding world itself. Not from Voldemort alone but from the instrument of Voldemort's defeat. He feared what an unrestricted Harry Potter might become. He tried to make sure I never became it. Yes. Does Reeves know? I told her this morning. She has a warrant. She'll arrest him today. Within the next 24 hours, I expect. Harry nodded. He thought about Elphias Doge. About the specific, elaborate horror of someone who feared what you might become so much that they spent 10 years making sure you couldn't. Not hatred, exactly. Something more complicated and more insidious, a kind of preemptive violence, dressed up as caution, telling itself it was protecting the world from you while actually just protecting itself from you, from the discomfort of your existence at full capacity. He thought about what Hermione had said. Someone chose those specific curses because they needed the damage to be deniable. He's going to Azkaban, Harry said. Yes. Good. He stood. Is that everything? Dumbledore looked at him. There is one more thing. Serious. Harry went very still. The investigation, its momentum, its public profile, has created an opportunity, Dumbledore said, and now something different moved through his voice. Something that was not guilt but hope, careful and tentative as something kept in a drawer for a long time and now brought out into light. Several Wisengamot members, in the wake of the hearing, have raised the question of other miscarriages of justice. Other cases where due process was not followed. Amelia Bones has been exceptionally. Is there a hearing? Harry said. His voice was not entirely even now. Just slightly not. There is a hearing scheduled, Dumbledore said. For Sirius Black. A formal, full hearing, with evidence, with witnesses. Proper testimony from Peter Pettigrew's victims, the muggles who can speak to the street, to what actually happened. Pensive evidence from myself. He paused. It is not guaranteed, Harry. But it is, real. It is actually happening. Harry sat back down. He hadn't meant to. His legs made the decision independently. When? 2 weeks. He put his face in his hands for a moment. Just a moment. Then he took them away and looked at Dumbledore, and he let himself, for the first time in 3 days, feel something that wasn't a clean controlled anger of reckoning but something warmer and more vulnerable and more important. He needs to know, Harry said. A message is being sent as we speak. Through channels the Ministry cannot intercept. Dumbledore's eyes had recovered something, not the twinkle exactly, not yet, but the light behind it. The source of it. He will know by tonight. Hermione was waiting outside the gargoyle. She had a notebook. Of course she had a notebook. Harry looked at it and then at her and said, Doge. She stopped. Her eyes went wide. Elphia's Doge. He had clearance to visit Privet Drive. Dumbledore's oldest friend, knows everything about the prophecy, terrified of what I might become. Harry started walking. She fell into step beside him. Reeves has a warrant. Oh, Hermione said. Then, oh. Then she stopped walking entirely. He's order. He's, Dumbledore's oldest friend. He's been at every order meeting, he has access to everything she stopped. Harry, if he was willing to curse a 4-year-old to prevent them from becoming powerful, what else has he done? What other decisions has he influenced? Harry looked at her. That's a very good question. I've been pulling on threads, she said, slightly grimly, and they resumed walking. The starvation curses are specialized, I said that before, but I've been going deeper. The specific variants used on you, 3 different variants, all from the same family of curses, they appear in exactly one text in the documented wizarding world. A manuscript called the Morses Codex. 13th century. There are 7 known copies. And Doge had access to one. Dumbledore's personal library, she said. Which Doge would have had access to for decades. She flipped open her notebook and showed him a page of her handwriting, which looked like a conspiracy diagram crossed with a library catalogue. But here's what's interesting. The Morses Codex was also held, for approximately 4 years in the 1960s, by the British Museum of Magical History. And it was checked out, during that period, by 3 people. One of whom was Doge. One of whom was Doge, she confirmed. But I also need to know if the investigation looked at the full list of people who had access to Dumbledore's library in the relevant period. Because if Doge was casting these curses, he needed privacy and time with you. But if someone else, she stopped herself. I'm not saying there's a second person. I'm saying we shouldn't assume there's only one. Harry was quiet for a moment. They'd reached the main staircase and paused at the landing where the 3rd floor branched off, the space between staircases wide enough for a private conversation. Share everything with Reeves, he said. Directly. Not through me, not through Dumbledore. Directly. He looked at her. And keep going. Obviously, she said, and he could see she was already somewhere 3 steps ahead, cataloging, connecting, chasing the shape of something she hadn't quite seen yet. Sirius's response came 2 days later. It came through a very small, very fast owl that arrived during breakfast and dropped a folded piece of parchment into Harry's porridge before Harry could intercept it. He fished it out, dried it on his sleeve, and unfolded it under the table. The handwriting was Sirius's. He knew it from the few letters they'd exchanged, the distinctive forward lean of it, the letters that pressed hard into the parchment as though urgency was a physical thing. But this note was short. Just 4 lines. Harry. I've heard. All of it. There aren't words, and I've been trying to find them for 2 days and I don't have them yet. I'll have them by the time we can talk properly. 2 weeks. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Don't worry about me. I'm already eating better. The last line made him laugh out loud, there at the Gryffindor table, sudden and sharp, and Ron looked at him sideways and Harry passed him the note. Ron read it, and his expression went through something complicated and real, and then he also laughed. Hermione read it, pressed her lips together in a way that meant she was suppressing something she found emotionally significant, and passed it back without comment. Ginny, sitting across from Harry, had not read it and didn't ask to. She just looked at his face and said, "Good news?" "Yeah," Harry said. "Good news." The news of Doge's arrest broke the same afternoon. Harry heard it from Neville, who had it from a sixth-year Hufflepuff, who had it from a Ravenclaw who had an owl from her father at the Ministry. By dinner, it was everywhere. Alpheus Doge, former Order of the Phoenix member and lifelong associate of Albus Dumbledore, arrested and charged with 118 counts of dark curse use on a minor. The prophet had already been to Doge's house, apparently. There was a photograph on the cover of the evening edition that someone brought into dinner, Doge being escorted from a modest townhouse in Hogsmeade, small and grey and very old, his head down. Harry looked at the photograph for exactly 3 seconds and then put the paper down. "How are you feeling?" Ron asked. "Strange," Harry said, which was true. I'm not upset. I just keep trying to make sense of it. He was afraid of me. Of what I might become. And instead of thinking, I don't know, what if I let this person develop normally and see what they choose to do with their power, he decided he knew better, Ginny said. She was eating with the efficient speed of a person who plays Quidditch and treats food as fuel. That's the thing about people like that. They're so convinced they're protecting everyone that they never once ask themselves who they're protecting everyone from. Harry looked at her. "You," she said, simply. "They were protecting everyone from you. Before you were old enough to have done anything. Before they had a single piece of evidence about what kind of person you were going to be." She pointed her fork at the photo. "That's not caution. That's prejudice with a plan. That's," Harry started. Then stopped. "That's exactly right, actually." "I know," she said, and went back to her food. Ron gave Harry a look that communicated several things, including "she does that and I've stopped being surprised and possibly also she's not wrong." McGonagall pulled Harry aside after dinner. She was waiting near the entrance to the great hall with the contained purposefulness of someone who had been making themselves wait for a precise moment. "Potter." "A word." She walked. He followed. She led him to her office, which was warmer than Dumbledore's and less theatrical, no whirring instruments, no talking portraits, just stacked marking and a cat sleeping on the windowsill and a fire going and 2 teacups already out, which meant she'd been planning this. She poured the tea. She handed him a cup. She sat down across from him and looked at him with the expression she reserved for things she found genuinely important, which was narrower and more direct than her classroom expression. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer honestly, not the way you think I want to hear." "When have I ever done that?" Harry said. Something warm passed through her face. "Fair point." She wrapped her hands around her teacup. "How are you, Harry?" Not the official answer. "Actually." He thought about it. He gave it real thought, which he didn't always do with that question, because usually the question was a courtesy and both parties understood that. This one wasn't a courtesy. "I'm angry," he said. It comes up in waves. Not at any one person, just at the whole shape of it. That it was allowed to go on. That everyone who looked at me for 15 years saw a thin, small kid and thought, well, that's just Harry. That's just how he is. He paused. And I'm something else. Something I don't have a word for yet. Like something's been removed from me. Like I've been carrying this thing so long I thought it was part of me, the weight of it, and now it's off and I keep expecting to feel it and not feeling it. McGonagall looked at him steadily. Like you're recalibrating. Yeah. Like that. That is a reasonable description of what is happening to you, she said, in a very literal sense as well as a metaphorical one. Pomfrey's treatment plan will take several months to fully reverse the curse damage. Your body is already beginning to respond differently to food, to sleep, to exercise. Your magical expression, she paused. My magic, Harry said. What's happening to it? Have you noticed anything? He had, actually. He'd been waiting for someone to ask. It's bigger, he said, which was inadequate but was the most accurate word he had. Like, before, when I cast, it was like I was pushing through something. A resistance. I thought that was just how magic felt. But in the last few days, show me, McGonagall said. He looked at her for a moment, surprised. She gestured toward the fireplace. He turned, raised his wand without particular concentration or effort, and performed a simple aguamenti. The jet of water that came from his wand hit the fireplace around with enough force to put the fire out completely, splashed the wall behind it, and drenched the cat on the windowsill, who departed the room at speed with the affronted dignity unique to cats. Harry and McGonagall both looked at the very wet wall. Well, McGonagall said. I've been trying to be careful, Harry said. Clearly. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you will need to recalibrate your output as the curse damage continues to resolve. But Harry, what you just did with a basic water summoning charm, that is not standard. She looked at him with the directness of someone presenting a fact. Your magical capacity has been artificially suppressed for the majority of your life. What you've demonstrated with that suppression in place has been remarkable. What you are capable of without it, is what Doge was afraid of, Harry said. Perhaps, she said. Or perhaps what he was afraid of was that someone with that capacity might not be controllable. Might make their own choices. Might refuse to be managed. She held his gaze. I, for one, find that entirely acceptable. Harry felt something in his chest loosen another notch. He'd been doing a lot of that lately, the loosening, as though the architecture of what had been built around him was coming apart one load-bearing wall at a time and the structure, surprisingly, wasn't collapsing. It was just becoming different. More its actual shape. What do I do with it, he said. The magic. Practically speaking. Practice, she said. Carefully. With me, to start with. I've spoken with Pomfrey, she agrees that controlled magical exercise will actually accelerate the healing. She picked up her tea. I would also suggest that you inform Professor Dumbledore of what we've just discovered. He should know the extent of, he already suspects, Harry said. He brought it up, sort of. He wasn't specific. No, McGonagall said, in a particular tone. He rarely is. They started the next morning. 6 o'clock, before breakfast, in the largest and used classroom on the 4th floor, McGonagall had cleared it of furniture and drawn the windows open to the early September grey. She stood at one end of the room with her arms crossed. Harry stood at the other end, feeling the strange energy of his own magic differently than he ever had, less like something he was reaching for and more like something that was simply present, waiting. We'll start with precision, McGonagall said. Not power. You clearly have power. What we need is control. She placed a row of 5 objects on a transfigured shelf, a teacup, a matchbox, a piece of chalk, a roll of parchment, a small stone. 5 objects. I want you to levitate each one independently. Exactly 6 inches. No more, no less. Harry raised his wand. Wingardium Leviosa. The teacup rose exactly 6 inches, held, came back down. He did the matchbox. 6 inches. The chalk. 6 inches. The parchment, He felt the control wobble and corrected it before it left his wand, the way you'd catch a stumble before it became a fall. 6 inches. The stone. He lifted it. It rose. Continued rising. The magic in it had a different quality, and Harry frowned and pulled back and the stone dropped, and then he caught it again at precisely 6 inches and held it there. The stone is denser, McGonagall said. You compensated mid-cast. That was well done. She walked forward and swept the objects off the shelf. Again. Faster. They worked for an hour and a half. By the end of it, Harry was neither tired nor winded, which was itself notable. Last year, extended spellwork left him drained in a way he'd always attributed to effort. Now the magic cycled back to him more readily, as though the channel it moved through was wider than it used to be. McGonagall stood opposite him at the end of the session, looking at him with that evaluating expression. That was, she said, an extremely productive first session. How productive? Harry said. The precision you just demonstrated, the mid-cast correction on the stone, the sustained independent levitation of 5 objects with no fluctuation, that is Newt-level fine control. You are 15. She paused. Without the curse suppression fully resolved. When it's fully resolved? Harry said. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. I have no reliable reference point for that, she said. Because I've never encountered a magical profile quite like yours. Harry absorbed this. He didn't feel frightened by it. He didn't feel the particular anxiety that had always accompanied his outbursts of accidental magic, the fear of being too much, the reflexive apology. He felt, instead, the simple and clarifying curiosity of someone encountering a landscape they hadn't known was there. Same time tomorrow, he said. Sharp at 6, she said. And, Potter, eat a proper breakfast before you come. Pomfrey's orders. Thursday morning, Hermione found him in the library. She found him by his hair, presumably, as she always did. She appeared around a bookshelf, looked at him with the expression of someone who has been running at speed and has arrived somewhere important, and sat down across from him and opened her notebook on the table. I need to tell you something, she said. Tell me. Reeves got back to me about the Morses Codex. The list of people who checked it out during its time at the museum. It was 3 people, as I said. Doge was one. She pressed her lips together. Dumbledore was another. Harry looked at her. Dumbledore checked out the Morses Codex in 1962, she said. Before the Order. Before Voldemort. When he was just a headmaster. Before any of this. But he had it. He read it. Her eyes were very steady. He knew those curses existed. He knew their characteristics, specifically that they produce damage that mimics ordinary malnutrition, specifically that they are designed to be undetectable without targeted scanning. She paused. And he designed a protective arrangement for you that contains 0 provision for targeted diagnostic scanning. The library was very quiet around them. Dust motes in the light from the high windows. The distant sound of the castle settling. You think he knew, Harry said. I think he might have suspected more than he's admitting, she said. I think he may have recognized the specific profile of your physical development and known, not just suspected vaguely, but known what it meant and what was causing it. She looked at him directly. I'm not saying he cast them. I'm not saying he authorized them. But I think he may have recognized the fingerprints and chosen, not to look too closely, Harry said. Hermione said nothing. He told me that himself, Harry said. He said he chose not to look too closely. I thought he meant he explained it away to himself. But if he'd read that codex, he would have known the pattern when he saw it, she said softly. Harry sat with this for a while. He didn't react immediately because the immediate reaction was enormous and he'd learned in the last week to let the enormous thing settle before he moved. He sat and breathed and thought about the man who had placed him in that house, who had given Doge clearance to visit, who had read a medieval text on dark metabolic curses and then spent 15 years not ordering a diagnostic scan on the child in his care. "I need to talk to him again," Harry said. Harry, not angry. "Not, I'm going to ask him a direct question and he's going to answer it." He looked at her. "Will you come with me?" She blinked, surprised. "You want me there?" "I want a witness," he said. "And I want someone who already has all the information, so he can't," he paused, "manage it." She closed her notebook. "All right," she said. "Yes." Dumbledore looked at both of them when they came through the office door, and something in his expression, just for a fraction of a second, told Harry that he had been expecting this. Perhaps not today, perhaps not Hermione specifically, but the shape of this conversation. The inevitability of it. "You read the Morsis Codex," Harry said, without preamble. Dumbledore did not pretend to be surprised. "Yes." "When?" 1962. "So you knew what the curses looked like? What their effects looked like? How they present?" "Yes." "And you watched me come back from Privet Drive every year." "Harry, let me finish." Harry's voice was not raised. It was the steadiest it had been. "You watched me come back every year. Thin, underdeveloped, magically suppressed. And you'd read the textbook on the exact curses that produce exactly those symptoms. And you didn't scan me." Dumbledore said, "No." "Did you know?" Harry said. Not suspect vaguely. "No." The silence was the longest yet. "I knew," Dumbledore said, "that something was wrong. I recognized certain markers. I told myself it was possible the curse effects were incidental rather than deliberate. That perhaps they had been cast once, by someone passing, and were not being refreshed." He looked at his desk. "I told myself this because the alternative, that someone I trusted explicitly, someone I had given access to you, had been systematically," he stopped. "I could not make myself take the step of confirming it. Because confirming it would have required action and action would have required me to acknowledge the extent of what my decisions had enabled." "So you protected yourself," Harry said. "Yes." Hermione made a sound. Not a word, just a small, involuntary sound of someone hearing something they expected and still finding it difficult. "You are going to tell Reeves all of this," Harry said. "Exactly what you just told me. The Codex, the recognition, the choice not to confirm." He looked at the man behind the desk, old, powerful, in possession of more genuine wisdom than almost anyone alive and also, apparently, in possession of the very human capacity to not want to know things that cost too much to know. "And then I need to know something else." "Anything," Dumbledore said, and the word was absolute in a way his words rarely were. "The blood wards. You said they protected me. Were they real? Did they actually protect me from Voldemort?" "Yes," Dumbledore said. "That part was genuine. The protection was real. Could it have been maintained without keeping me at Privet Drive specifically? Could I have lived somewhere else, with the Weasleys, with anyone, and had the same protection?" The pause told him. "The blood connection required proximity to Lily's blood," Dumbledore said carefully. "To Petunia, specifically. But proximity did not require, I could have," he stopped. "The arrangement did not require you to live there full time. I could have established you elsewhere and had you visit Petunia periodically to renew the ward. The effect would have been the same." He met Harry's eyes. "I chose the arrangement I chose because it was simpler. Because I wanted you, contained. I did not want you growing up in the wizarding world with knowledge of your own importance. I was afraid of what that might produce." Hermione set her notebook down on her knee with a precise, controlled motion that communicated exactly how she felt about that without requiring a single word. "So two people," Harry said, "were afraid of what I might become. And both of them made decisions about my life based on that fear. And neither of them asked me anything." He looked at Dumbledore. "I'm not going to perform forgiveness for you." I'm not there yet and I might not be for a while. But I need you to understand, the version of me you were afraid of. The powerful, uncontrolled, dangerous version. That was never real. What was real was a kid who needed someone to look after him properly. And the version you got instead, the underdeveloped, surprised to be alive version, he paused. That version's gone. You're dealing with me now. The actual me. And I need you to start treating me accordingly. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Something in the old face moved, not broke, because breaking implied that what was there before had been whole, and Harry was not sure it had been. Changed. Became more honest. Yes, Dumbledore said. I will. Harry stood. Good. He moved toward the door. Hermione gathered her notebook and followed. At the door Harry stopped, hand on the frame, and looked back. For what it's worth, he said, and he meant it honestly, I think the part of you that built the Order and fought Voldemort and kept going for 50 years is genuinely good. I think it's real. He paused. I also think good people can do terrible things when they're afraid and call it wisdom. And I think the difference between a good person and a better one is whether they can eventually tell the difference. He looked at the old headmaster. You told the truth today. Both times I asked. So there's that. He left. Hermione walked beside him down the corridor, neither of them speaking until they'd reached the landing. Then she said, You knew he was going to admit it. I hoped, Harry said. There's a difference. She thought about this. He's going to give full testimony to Reeves. Yeah. Harry started down the stairs. And then we'll see what the Wisengamot does with a confession from Albus Dumbledore. He glanced back at her. How's your evidence on the Morsus Codex? Thorough, she said. Good. Give it all to Reeves by tonight. Already oling it when we get back. They descended the stairs into the ordinary afternoon of the castle, the sound of students between classes, Peeves howling something profane from the fourth floor, a group of first-years arguing over a map, and Harry walked through all of it with his shoulders back and his chin up, taking up the amount of space he was entitled to, feeling the castle under his feet in a new way. Like it was meeting him for the first time. Like it had been waiting. He thought about Sirius. 2 weeks. He thought about Doge in custody. About Vernon and Petunia, Azkaban ahead of them. About Dumbledore, sitting in his office with the weight of truth finally set down on the table between them. He thought about the morning session with McGonagall, the magic cycling back to him clean and vast and his. He thought about the specific feeling of a locked thing beginning to open. He took the stairs 2 at a time and didn't look back. Chapter 4, The weight lifted. Pomfrey's treatment plan was not subtle. It arrived on Harry's bedside table Saturday morning in the form of a 12-page document written in her precise, slightly aggressive handwriting, with subsections, footnotes, and a schedule color-coded in 3 different inks. He read it at breakfast while Ron peered over his shoulder with the expression of someone watching a very complicated map unfold. She's scheduled you for 6 meals a day, Ron said, with something approaching reverence. 5. The 6th one is a restorative potion that counts as a meal apparently. That's brilliant. Can I get on this plan? You're not cursed, Ron. Details. Harry set the document down and looked at it properly. The eating schedule was the straightforward part. The potions list was longer, a daily nutrient infusion draft, a twice-weekly ossification restorative for the bone density damage, something called a metabolic recalibration tonic that Pomfrey had helpfully annotated with tastes unpleasant, take with pumpkin juice, not negotiable. There were also weekly check-ins in the hospital wing for diagnostic monitoring, the morning sessions with McGonagall, and a note at the bottom in slightly larger letters, sleep is not optional. 8 hours minimum. I will know. He believed her entirely. It's a lot, Hermione said, reading it from the other side. It's fine, Harry said. And meant it, which surprised him slightly. A week ago, 2 weeks ago, the prospect of being managed, scheduled, monitored would have produced the familiar low-grade resistance that had always accompanied anyone trying to involve themselves in his welfare. The suspicion of it. The waiting for the catch. Now he just looked at the document and thought, Pomfrey made this because she wants me healthy. That was the whole reason. There wasn't a strategy attached to it, no greater good being served. Just a woman who had decided, 31 years in, that she was going to do the job properly. He folded the document and put it in his bag. He ate all of his breakfast plus a second helping of eggs that he'd have refused last year on the grounds that it would invite comment. Nobody commented. Ron ate twice as much out of solidarity, which was very Ron, and Hermione pretended not to watch Harry eat in the way she always pretended not to do things she was very clearly doing. Ginny, 3 seats down, slid the remaining toast in his direction without looking at him. He took it. The first real indication of what his magic was doing came on Monday. Defense against the dark arts. Umbridge was gone, departed at the end of last year under circumstances that still made Harry feel a specific, uncomplicated satisfaction, and her replacement was a ministry-approved but otherwise functional which named Professor Alderton, who was competent and direct and had the refreshing teaching philosophy of actually teaching rather than reading from a textbook. They were working on shield charms. Advanced applications, not just the basic protego but layered shields, directional shields, the kind of defensive magic that required sustained concentration and precise output calibration. I want to see everyone's basic protego first, Alderton said. Then we'll build from there. Potter, would you demonstrate? Harry raised his wand. Standard protego. The shield expanded from his wand tip in the usual silver-white bloom and Alderton cast a mild flipendo at it, the kind of spell designed to test shield integrity. The flipendo hit the shield and stopped. Not deflected. Not absorbed. Stopped, completely, the spell dissolving against the surface of the shield like water hitting stone. The shield itself didn't waver. Didn't contract. Just sat there, steady and enormous, and Alderton's wand dropped very slightly. Right, she said, after a pause. Good. That's, yes. Good. She looked at Harry with the expression of someone recalculating. Perhaps a touch less output, just so, she tried again, harder this time. A proper stupefy. The class watched. The shield took it without flickering. The stupefy dissolved. Harry hadn't moved. Alderton lowered her wand and looked at him properly. How does it feel on your end? Normal, Harry said, which was true. He'd put standard effort in. It just apparently wasn't standard anymore. Interesting, Alderton said, in the tone of someone who finds something interesting and is also deciding what to do about it. I'd like to have a conversation with you after class, Potter. Sure. The class proceeded. Harry practiced alongside everyone else, dialing down his output deliberately, and even dialed down, his shielding work was noticeably ahead of the class. He wasn't showing off, he was genuinely trying to match calibration, but the gap between what his magic wanted to do and what standard coursework required was becoming apparent in a way it hadn't been before. Dean caught up with him afterward. Mate, that shield. I know. Alderton looked like she'd seen a ghost. She handled it well, actually. Harry. Dean stopped walking and looked at him with the directness of someone who has been paying attention. I sat next to you in defense for 3 years. Your shields were always good. That, he gestured vaguely at the space where the lesson had been. That was something else. Harry looked at him. Yeah, he said. I know. Dean nodded once, with the uncomplicated acceptance of someone who has filed the information and will not make it weird. Good, he said. We need it, probably. Given, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. They both knew what was coming, what had always been coming, what had been coming since a baby in a crib and a prophecy in a cave. Good, he said again, and went to his next class. Alderton's after-class conversation was brief and surprisingly useful. She was a practical woman. She sat on her desk, arms crossed, and said, "You're going through a magical recalibration. I've seen it once before, in a student whose core had been suppressed by a long-term potion. Same pattern, output far exceeding expected levels, control initially inconsistent, stabilizing as the person adjusts." She looked at him. In that case it took about 3 months for the student to fully recalibrate. The process was, she paused. It's uncomfortable. Not physically. But magically. Like trying to hold a river in a bucket. That's exactly what it feels like, Harry said. Here's what helped, she said. Intentional high-output work. Controlled, supervised, but not artificially limited. If you spend all your time throttling back, you don't build the fine motor control. You need to actually use the full range, in a safe environment, to develop the precision you need. She met his eyes. I've already spoken with McGonagall. She told me about your morning sessions. I'd like to add defense into that rotation. I can give you Monday and Wednesday mornings. McGonagall keeps Tuesday and Thursday. And Saturday? Rest, she said firmly. McGonagall's orders, apparently. He started to say something. They're also my orders, she said. Don't argue with both of us simultaneously. It's inadvisable. The morning sessions with McGonagall had already evolved well past the introductory precision work. By the second week they were into transfiguration at a scale Harry hadn't attempted in class, large-scale transformation, complex material transmutation, the kind of work that required not just power but the specific, fine-tuned intelligence of knowing exactly what you wanted and asking the magic for it precisely. He was, McGonagall informed him with the restraint of someone who does not hand out compliments carelessly, a natural. You're a natural, she said, on Tuesday morning, watching Harry transfigure a stone bench into a fully functional oak tree, bark texture perfect, root structure extrapolated correctly, leaves producing actual photosynthesis, in under 4 seconds. I want to say that carefully so you don't get complacent, but, yes. You are a natural. My dad was good at it, Harry said. Something shifted in McGonagall's expression. She looked at the tree for a moment. Your father was exceptional, she said. One of the best I taught. He had a flair for it. An instinct. She looked back at Harry. You have something more than instinct. You have precision on top of instinct, which is rarer. Harry flicked his wand and the tree became a bench again, then something else entirely, a stone archway, carved, with a running vine detail that he'd extrapolated from memory of the Hogwarts grounds. He brought it back to a bench. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. What was it like, she said, performing magic before now? When you attempted difficult spells? Harry thought about it honestly. Like pushing something heavy up a slope, he said. It moved, but it cost. And sometimes it just slid back. Spells I should have been able to hold would slip. I thought that was just effort. I thought everyone felt that. They don't, McGonagall said. Magic should feel like extension. Like your arm is longer than it is. She paused. What does it feel like now? Harry looked at the bench. He summoned a simple Lumos, the spell he'd learned first, the most basic magic there was, and the light that emerged from his wand was warm and steady and enormous, filling the classroom to every corner without effort, without cost, without that familiar sense of pushing. Like breathing, he said. McGonagall looked at the light he was producing from a first-year charm. She said nothing for a moment. Then, yes. That's what it should always have been. Wednesday brought 2 things. First, Ron. Harry had been so absorbed in the healing and the sessions and the investigation's ongoing forward movement that he'd missed, slightly, the way Ron had been carrying something. He noticed it on Wednesday morning when Ron sat down across from him at breakfast and didn't speak for 3 full minutes, which for Ron indicated something either very wrong or very personal or both. All right? Harry said. I've been trying to figure out how to say something, Ron said. So say it. Ron picked up his fork, set it down, picked it up again. When you told us. In the hospital wing. About all of it. The cupboard, the food, all of it. He looked at his plate. I keep thinking, you came to my house. Every summer. You were at the burrow. And we, my family, Mum especially, we fed you and we saw how you ate and we noticed you were thin and we just, he stopped. We thought you ate like that because you were nervous or something. Because you were Harry Potter and you had a lot on your mind. Harry looked at him. We should have asked, Ron said. We should have said something. Properly. Not assumed it was fine because you said it was fine. He finally looked up. I'm sorry we didn't see it. Harry took a moment with this, because it deserved one. It was, he understood, the thing Ron had been holding for 2 weeks, not guilt exactly, but something honest and specific. The recognition that people who loved him had been close enough to see and hadn't. You weren't meant to see it, Harry said. I was very practiced at making it look fine. I had years of practice. He paused. And you were 15. You were a kid. It wasn't your job to catch something that every adult in my life had already decided not to look at. Still, Ron said. Still, yeah, Harry agreed. But it's, Ron, you're the person who sat with me in the hospital wing. You gave me permission to be angry without trying to talk me out of it. You didn't make it about you or about what it meant for everyone else. He picked up his fork. That's not nothing. That's a lot. Ron absorbed this in silence. Then he ate his breakfast with the focused, purposeful energy of someone who has said the important thing and can now attend to sausages. Right, he said, through a mouthful. Good. Very eloquent, Harry said. Shut up. Second, a letter from the ministry. It arrived mid-morning, formal seal, the kind of envelope that commanded attention by its weight alone. Amelia Bones's signature in the corner. Harry opened it in an empty classroom on the second floor, alone by choice, because some things needed to be processed in private before they could be shared. The hearing for Sirius Black, it said, was confirmed for the following Friday. Full Wizengamot session. Evidence admitted. Dumbledore was providing pensive memories. 3 of the original Muggle witnesses from the street in Godric's Hollow were providing testimony, magically translated and supported by affidavit. Pettigrew's verified status as alive and in custody, he'd been caught in the chaos of the Triwizard Tournament's aftermath, meant that the original evidence against Sirius was formally discredited. The letter ended, the outcome is not guaranteed. Nothing in law ever is. But the evidence is strong. Be there. Attached was a visitor's pass for the Wizengamot Gallery. Harry folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. He stood in the empty classroom for a moment, sunlight coming through the window in long stripes across the stone floor, and he allowed himself to want this in a way he'd never quite permitted before. He'd learned, had been taught, really, by years of hope meeting disappointment, to hold good possibilities lightly, not to lean on them. Don't want things too much. Don't count on anything. He felt, very deliberately, himself deciding not to do that this time. Sirius was coming home. That was real. He was going to let it be real. Thursday's morning session with McGonagall took an unexpected turn. She'd brought a stack of books, not textbooks. Old books, pulled from what Harry suspected was her private collection rather than any school shelf. She set them on the table at the start of the session and looked at him. Your father was an animagus, she said. Harry went very still. The process, McGonagall said, is long and difficult and requires a level of magical core stability and control that most wizards never develop. Most who attempt it do so in their 20s, at the earliest. She looked at him steadily. Given your current trajectory, and I am being specific here, not encouraging recklessness, I believe it is worth beginning the theoretical groundwork. Now. So that when you are ready, practically speaking, the intellectual preparation is already done. You think I could do it, Harry said. I think your father did it at 16, McGonagall said, under considerably less favorable conditions, with considerably less access to proper guidance. She paused. I think you are, magically speaking, already operating well beyond your father's level at the same age. I think it would be an insult to your capability not to at least introduce the theory. Harry looked at the books. Then at her. I thought you were careful about handing out compliments, he said. I am, she said. That was not a compliment. That was a technical assessment. She sat down and opened the first book. Sit down, Potter. He sat. The animagus transformation begins with meditation, she said. Not magic. The identification of your core magical form, the animal expression of your inner self, precedes any spell work by weeks or months. It is introspective work. Some find it quite difficult. She looked at him. I imagine you will not. Why? Because you have spent the last 3 weeks doing something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding, she said. Looking very directly and very honestly at who you actually are. That is essentially what the animagus meditation requires. She slid the first book across the table. Read the first 4 chapters this week. We'll discuss on Tuesday. Harry picked up the book. The cover was old leather, the title embossed in simple letters, the interior form, A Practitioner's Guide to Animagus Identification. He opened it on the first page and started reading. Friday he saw Pomfrey for his second diagnostic. She ran it in silence, reading the results scroll as it materialized, her expression doing the focused, cataloging thing that he'd come to read as satisfaction she was managing professionally. Bone density is up 4 points, she said. The calcified curse damage in the femoral structure and lower spine is responding to the ossification restorative. She scrolled further. Metabolic function has improved significantly, you're absorbing nutrition at approximately 60% of normal rate, which is up from 31% at initial assessment. What's a normal rate? 100%, she said. But 60 is substantial progress for 2 weeks. By the end of the month I expect to see you at 80 or above. She let the scroll close. Your weight is up 3 kilograms. He thought about this. 3 kilograms in 2 weeks. His body, finally allowed to actually use the food he gave it. Am I going to get taller? Pomfrey looked at him. Possibly. The bone structure suggests your natural height is several centimeters above current. Whether the growth plates will respond at 15, she paused. I think there may be some modest additional height, yes. We'll monitor. He absorbed this with the slightly surreal quality of someone discovering that the body they've inhabited their whole life was not, in fact, their body, just a diminished version of it. The curse count, he said. The 118. She'd been waiting for this question. 32 have been fully lifted. The most recent castings, the ones from this past summer and the summer before, are responding best to treatment. The older ones take longer. She looked at him. We'll clear them all, Harry. Every single one. It will take several months but we will clear all 118. She said it with the absolute certainty of a woman who has made a decision and intends to stand behind it for as long as required. I know, he said. How are you sleeping? Better. This was true. He'd been sleeping 8 hours with the reliability of someone whose body had finally been given permission to actually rest, and the quality of it was different, not the restless, surface sleep he'd always had but something deeper, more restorative. He woke up feeling like himself. He was still discovering what that felt like. I had a dream last night, he said, without planning to say it. Pomfrey looked at him. Not a Voldemort dream. Not the nightmare kind. He paused. I was flying. Just flying, no Quidditch, no one chasing me. Just, the sky. He looked slightly away. I don't remember ever dreaming about flying just for the sake of it before. It was always Quidditch or running from something. Pomfrey set down her scroll very gently. Her expression had the quality it got when she was feeling something she'd decided not to perform, just allow. "That's a good sign," she said, in the ordinary voice she used for clinical observations, and somehow that made it more meaningful than if she'd made a ceremony of it. The letter from Fred and George arrived Saturday afternoon. It was 6 pages long, dense with their particular brand of chaotic intelligence, and it began, "Harry. Word reaches us that extraordinary things are afoot. Mom has written 7 letters this week alone, which by her standards means either someone nearly died or Christmas came early. Turns out, both. We have a business proposition." Harry read it on the Quidditch pitch bleachers, alone in the afternoon cold, with the particular pleasure of uninterrupted Fred and George correspondence. The business proposition, which emerged from the chaos of the letter's first 4 pages, was this: they wanted to donate a portion of their shop's revenue, not a small portion, to a fund for children in similar situations to Harry's. Specifically to ensure mandatory diagnostic testing for any magical child coming from an entirely Muggle household, with follow-up protocols. "We've been thinking about it since Ron told us," they wrote. "Between us we have the exact sum of 0 ideas about the legal mechanics of setting this up, which is where Hermione presumably comes in. But the money's there. We've had a good first year. We want it to mean something. Talk to Granger, send us back a plan, we'll fund it. Also we're coming to the serious hearing because wild Thestrals couldn't keep us away. Save us seats. Love, Fred and George." Fred made me write that, I would have just signed our names. Gee, Harry sat on the bleachers and read it twice. Below him the Quidditch pitch was empty and the late afternoon light was turning everything gold, and he thought about the specific, impractical, entirely characteristic generosity of Fred and George Weasley, who had turned their own stubborn ingenuity into something real and were now trying to aim it at something that mattered. He put the letter in his pocket next to Bones's letter about the serious hearing. Pulled out the Animagus book. Read for an hour in the cold. The chapter was about the relationship between magical core and animal form, the idea that your form wasn't assigned but recognized, that it had always existed in you waiting to be seen, the same way your magic had always existed. You didn't create it. You found it. He read the passage twice. The second time he thought about a stag, his Patronus, his father's Animagus form, the silver creature that had galloped out of his wand and driven back 100 Dementors. He thought about the ease of it. The way the Patronus had always come to him more readily than any other magic, even at his most suppressed and damaged and afraid. Something in his chest settled. He didn't pursue the thought further. He let it sit where it had landed. Sunday, the Gryffindors played the first Quidditch match of the season against Ravenclaw. Harry flew. This was the correct and sufficient description of what happened. He flew in the way that was different from every previous time he'd flown, which was itself something he'd loved completely, but this was different in the way that the dream had been different. The way the morning sessions were different. Everything without the resistance, the pushing through, the effort that he'd always thought was just effort but was in fact the specific effort of operating through 118 layers of curse damage. He was in the air for 43 minutes. Ravenclaw's Seeker was a 6th-year named Chambers who was widely considered the second-best Seeker at Hogwarts in recent years. Harry was aware of her as a capable and respected adversary and spent approximately 12 of the 43 minutes in competition with her. The other 31 he spent simply flying. He caught the snitch in a dive that started from directly above the Ravenclaw goalposts and ended 6 inches from the ground, a dive so steep and fast that the crowd noise went through 3 distinct phases: anticipation, then silence so complete you could hear the wind, then an explosion of sound that Harry didn't hear because he was already pulling up, grass brushing the tips of his feet, the snitch in his closed fist doing its furious little wings against palm flutter. He rose back up into the cold air. Held the snitch up. Felt the sun on his face and the wind across his hands. Ginny was the first to reach him. She'd been playing chaser and came at him from a banking angle, pulling her broom level with his at speed, and for a moment they were just side by side 30 feet above the pitch, both of them grinning into the same cold wind. "That dive," she said. "I know. That was not a normal dive." "No," he agreed. She looked at him sideways. The grin did something slightly more complicated. "Show off," she said. "Little bit," he admitted. She laughed, and it was warm and real and right there, and Harry thought, not for the first time this week, but with slightly more clarity, that Ginny Weasley was someone he'd been looking at from the wrong angle for approximately 4 years and ought to correct that at some point. Not today. Today was Quidditch and cold air and the snitch in his hand. The team descended. Ron was already at the ground, arms up, the beaming expression on his face that belonged specifically to Quidditch victories. Neville, who had come to watch, was on his feet in the stands doing something enthusiastic with his scarf. Harry landed and the team surrounded him in the way Quidditch teams do after a winning catch, and he let himself be in it, not separate, not observing from a careful distance, but actually in it, actually present for his own celebration in a way he hadn't always been. Hermione appeared at the edge of the group, clearly having come from the stands. She had her notebook under one arm and her scarf wound around her neck 3 times. She looked at Harry and said, "I have something to tell you." "After celebrating," Ron said. "It's important, after celebrating," Ron said firmly. Hermione considered this, looked at Harry, and made the decision that this was a legitimate battle to lose. "After celebrating," she agreed. "But then immediately after." Immediately after celebrating turned out to be the corner of the common room, an hour later, with the party going on around them at the volume that a Gryffindor Quidditch victory reliably produced. Hermione had her notebook open and her tea in front of her and the specific expression that meant the thread she'd been pulling had led somewhere significant. "The third person," she said. Harry leaned forward. The Morses Codex was checked out by 3 people during its time at the museum. "I told you Doge was one, Dumbledore was another." She turned a page. The third person checked it out in 1979. 2 years before Voldemort's first defeat. They held it for 3 weeks. She looked up at him. "The checkout was made under an alias. I found this through correspondence records the museum maintained, not the official checkout log, which was the alias. The correspondence, a letter asking for an extended loan, was signed differently." "Who was it?" Harry said. Hermione pressed her lips together. "Do you remember the name Bathilda Bagshot?" Harry blinked. "The magical historian. She wrote a history of magic." "Yes. She also lived in Godric's Hollow. She was a neighbor of your parents." Hermione's voice was very careful. "She died in the autumn of Voldemort's first fall. And I don't think the third person was her. I think the alias correspondence was sent from her address, but the handwriting in the letter doesn't match her known writing." She looked at Harry. "Someone used her address. Someone who was in Godric's Hollow in 1979 and had a reason to use an alias." Harry was very still. The common room was loud around them. Fred and George had produced something that generated confetti. "Someone in Godric's Hollow in 1979, Harry said. "Before my parents died." "Yes. Before I was born," he said. "My parents moved to Godric's Hollow they moved there when they went into hiding. Late 1979, early 1980. "Yes," Hermione said. "So someone was there before them. Or arrived when they did. Someone with access to the Morses Codex, or at least the knowledge of it, who was in the same location as my parents and who later had access to me at Privet Drive." He looked at her. "The 2 dead ones Dumbledore mentioned. The ones whose signatures matched among the 3 candidates." "I need to know who they were," Hermione said. "Dumbledore didn't tell you names." "No," Harry said. "But I'm going to ask him." He stood. "Harry, she checked her watch. "It's 11:30. "I know," he said. "This can't wait until morning." She looked at him for a moment. Then she closed her notebook and stood up. I'm coming, she said. I know you are. They left the party behind them, moved through the portrait hole into the quiet corridor, and Harry felt the thread pulling, the same thread Hermione had been following, with the same certainty, towards something that was not yet in sight but was getting closer. 2 floors above the celebrations, in the dark and the quiet of the moving staircases, Harry said, if someone was in Godric's Hollow before my parents, before the attack, they could have cast the first curses before you were even at Privet Drive, Hermione said. In the immediate period after the attack, before Hagrid retrieved you, before Dumbledore placed you, she stopped walking. Harry. If the very first castings predate Privet Drive, then this started earlier than anyone thought, Harry said. And the person who started it was there. The night my parents died. He held her gaze. Or close to it. The castle was silent around them. The staircases moved, slow and certain in the dark. Somewhere outside, clouds had broken and moonlight came through the high windows in long silver streaks, and Harry walked through them without slowing. He felt the thread. It was almost solid now, almost visible. He followed it. Chapter 5, The Thread. Dumbledore was awake. Harry didn't know why this surprised him. It was approaching midnight, the old man kept unpredictable hours, and the gargoyle stepped aside without hesitation when Harry approached it, which meant either Dumbledore had set a permanent recognition for him or had been expecting this visit. Harry suspected the latter. Dumbledore had a particular talent for expecting things. The office was lit softly, just the fireplace and 2 desk lamps, which gave everything a warm amber quality that felt at odds with the conversation Harry intended to have. Fawkes was awake on his perch, watching the door with the calm, knowing attention of a creature that has seen everything twice. Dumbledore looked up when they came in. He looked at Harry, then at Hermione, then at the notebook under her arm, and said nothing for a moment. The 2 dead ones, Harry said, without sitting down. The Order members whose magical signatures partially matched the curse castings. You said 2 were dead. I need their names. Dumbledore set down his quill. Harry, I know about Godric's Hollow, Harry said. I know someone was there. Someone with knowledge of the Morsus Codex, using an alias, operating from near my parents' location before the attack. He watched the old face carefully. I need the names. Tonight. Because if someone was in Godric's Hollow the night my parents died, or close to it, and that same someone cast the first starvation curses on me, the timeline changes, Hermione said quietly, from beside him. The whole narrative of what happened that night changes. Dumbledore was very still. You already know what I'm about to suggest, Harry said. I can see it on your face. So let's not make me say it out loud and then have you confirm it. Just start from the beginning. Tell me who was in Godric's Hollow. The fire crackled. Fawkes made a soft sound, low and musical, not his full song, something smaller. A sound of weight being acknowledged. Dumbledore stood. He moved to the cabinet beside the window, not the one with the sorting hat, the other one, narrower, that Harry had always noticed but never seen opened. He produced a key from somewhere in his robes and unlocked it, and from inside took a shallow stone bowl that Harry recognized, a pensieve, smaller than the one in the cabinet alcove but identical in function. He set it on the desk. I will show you, Dumbledore said. Both of you. It is faster than explanation, and, he paused. And you deserve to see it rather than to hear my interpretation of it. He reached into his own temple with the tip of his wand and drew out a thread of silver memory, long and luminous, and lowered it into the pensieve. 1981, he said. The night of October 31st, and the morning of November 1st. What I saw, and what I understood, and what I did not understand until considerably later. He looked at Harry. Ready? Yes, Harry said. Hermione took a breath. Yes. The memory had the quality all pensive memories had, slightly too vivid, colors saturated past reality, sounds arriving from everywhere at once. Harry and Hermione stood in a street he'd only ever seen in photographs, Godric's Hollow, the old village, the cobblestones under his feet uneven and cold, the dark pressing down except for where house lights made warm squares against it. The cottage was partially destroyed. Harry had seen it before, the preserved ruin, the memorial, the plaque. But seeing it fresh was different. The upper floor was open to the sky, the roof blown out, the walls scorched. The ground floor was intact but dark, and there were people moving. Harry counted them fast, 3 figures, at different points around the property, none of them standing together. The first was Hagrid, enormous and unmistakable even in the dark, coming through the garden gate with the specific careful urgency of someone carrying something infinitely precious. The second was Dumbledore himself, the memory Dumbledore, standing at the garden wall, face upturned, watching the ruined upper floor. The third was someone Harry didn't immediately recognize. A smaller figure, dark-robed, standing at the edge of the property near the front wall. Far enough back to not be obvious. Close enough to see everything. "Who is that?" Hermione murmured. Harry watched the figure. They were still in a very particular way, not grief still, not shock still, but the stillness of someone doing something they did not want witnessed. Their wand was in their hand, but angled down and inward, held against their thigh where the angle of their body obscured it from the other figures at the property. Memory Dumbledore turned, saw the figure, and crossed to them. Harry moved closer to hear. "Shouldn't be here," Memory Dumbledore was saying, his voice low and urgent. "How did you know?" "The protective wards fell," the figure said. A woman's voice. "I felt them go. We all felt them go." She looked at the cottage. "Is he gone?" Dumbledore said. "Voldemort is gone. The boy survived." The figure turned. Harry saw the face. He didn't recognize it, and said so, quietly, to Hermione. "I do," she said. Her voice was strange. "Harry, that's Arabella Figg." He blinked. "Mrs. Figg? The squib?" She lives on Wisteria Walk in Little Whinging," Hermione said. "2 streets from Privet Drive." Her grip on her notebook had tightened. "She was your mother's, she was one of the Order's network. Dumbledore placed her there to keep watch on you." "She's a squib," Harry said. "She can't cast magic." "She said she's a squib," Hermione said. They both watched the figure in the memory, Mrs. Figg, supposedly, the batty old woman with the cats and the terrible slides and the smell of old cabbage, the woman who had lived 2 streets from Harry his entire life, who had looked after him on occasion, who had been present and close, and there, Mrs. Figg in the memory was holding a wand. Harry felt the ground shift. "She lied," he said. "She's not a squib." "Or she was," Hermione said, and something changed. "Or she was always more than a squib, and the squib identity was cover." She was doing the very rapid, methodical mental work that Harry recognized as her arriving somewhere fast. Wisteria Walk. 2 streets from Privet Drive. She was watching over you. She had access to you. She was present the night your parents died, and she had a wand. The memory shifted. Time compressing, moving forward the way pensive memories sometimes did when the relevant moment had passed. The scene was the same street, but now it was early morning, cold November light, and Hagrid was leaving on a flying motorcycle, a bundle in his arms. The figure of Mrs. Figg, memory Mrs. Figg, watched from a distance. Watched Hagrid go. Watched the bundle. And then she raised her wand, and even though Harry couldn't see the spell she cast, even though the wand movement was too small and too quick to identify, he saw what it was directed at. The bundle. The baby in Hagrid's arms. Moving away, fast, disappearing down the street. The first casting. The very first one. Not at Privet Drive. Not after Dumbledore's arrangement. On the road out of Godric's Hollow, in the early hours of November 1st, 1981, before Harry James Potter had ever arrived at the house where the starvation curses would become the architecture of his childhood. Hermione made a sharp sound. Harry said nothing. They came out of the pensieve. The amber office was exactly as they'd left it. Dumbledore stood behind the desk. His expression had the specific quality of a man who has shown someone something true and is waiting to be held accountable for it. "You knew," Harry said. "I knew," Dumbledore said, "that Arabella Figg was present that night. I knew she was not simply the squib she presented as. What I did not know, or what I chose not to investigate to its conclusion, was the full extent of her ability and her activities." He looked at Harry directly. "I recognized, within the first 2 years of your time at Privet Drive, that the curse markers on your development were consistent with an initial casting that predated your arrival there. I concluded, I told myself, that it was residual curse damage from the night of Voldemort's attack. From the killing curse that failed." "But you knew that wasn't right," Harry said. "I suspected it was not correct," Dumbledore said. "The profile was wrong for residual killing curse effects. But it would have meant, that someone in your network," Harry said, "someone you placed to watch me, had attacked me before you even got me to Privet Drive." He watched the old face. "That your entire protective arrangement had been compromised from the moment of its creation." "Yes." "So you decided it was the killing curse's aftereffects," Harry said. "Because the alternative was your fault." Dumbledore did not deny this. Harry breathed in. Breathed out. He was not as calm as he appeared, but the anger had the clean quality it had been developing over the past weeks, not explosive, not uncontrolled, but focused and useful, like a fire with a specific purpose. He let it burn without letting it run. "Where is she?" he said. "Reeves has the memory, I provided it this morning. I believe a warrant is being prepared." He paused. "She will not be difficult to locate. She has remained in Wisteria Walk." "She stayed," Harry said. "All these years. 2 streets away." "Yes." "Why?" Hermione said. It was the first she'd spoken since coming out of the pensieve, and the word was so precisely targeted that it stopped the room. Dumbledore looked at her. Arabella Figg was not, originally, a member of the Order. She was, tangentially connected to it, through Lily Evans. They were at school together, several years apart. Figg was a witch of modest ability who experienced a significant magical accident in her mid-20s that severely curtailed her magical capacity. She was effectively a squib thereafter, functionally, if not technically. She was bitter about it. He paused. She believed Lily's son, the product of magic so powerful it defeated Voldemort, represented something that she had lost. She resented it. She was afraid of it. She was afraid of a baby, Harry said. She was afraid of what the baby might become, Dumbledore said. She had read enough, through access to my library, through Doge, who was a connection of hers, to understand what the prophecy implied. A power Voldemort didn't know. She decided, and I use the word loosely, because I believe it was less a decision than a festering, that the appropriate response was to ensure that power never fully developed. While living 2 streets away to make sure I didn't die, Harry said. She kept me alive and kept me suppressed simultaneously. Yes. And Doge, Hermione said, looking at her notebook, flipping back several pages. Doge and Fig were connected. She had access to his knowledge of the curses. They were aligned in their fear, Dumbledore said. Though they acted independently, I believe. Doge did not know about Fig's initial casting, and Fig did not know the full extent of Doge's subsequent work. They were, parallel rather than collaborative. 2 people, Harry said slowly, acting independently, from the same fear, producing the same outcome. He looked at Dumbledore. And you placed me between them. The silence was absolute. Yes, Dumbledore said. It was almost a whisper. I can't do this again tonight, Harry said. He stepped back from the desk. I can't sit here and hear another version of this. I believe you that you didn't know the full picture. I believe you recognized enough to be uncomfortable and chose to look away. I've already said what I needed to say about that. He picked up his jacket from the chair where he dropped it. Tell Reeves about Fig. All of it, including the memory. Tell her about Doja's connection to Fig. He looked at the headmaster. And I need a list. Every person who had access to your library in the relevant period. Every person who had clearance to visit Privet Drive. I want to see it myself. I will have it for you tomorrow, Dumbledore said. And Harry looked at him. I have spent 50 years being certain I knew what was necessary, Dumbledore said. What was required? I have spent 50 years trusting my own judgment over the needs of individuals because the stakes seemed too large to allow for individual priority. He was quiet for a moment. I am not certain anymore. Of my own judgment. That is, he paused. That is a very late discovery. Harry looked at him for a moment. At the tiredness in the old face. The weight of it. He thought about what McGonagall had said weeks ago, the difference between a good person and a better one. He thought about what Ginny had said about people who believed they were protecting everyone. Late is better than never, Harry said. But not by as much as you'd hope. He nodded at the pensive. Thank you for showing us. He left. Hermione caught up with him in the corridor. She was already writing in her notebook, moving and writing simultaneously in the way that should have been impossible but was, for Hermione, simply standard operation. Fig's magical history, she said, catching up. The magical accident in her mid-20s. I need to find out what that was. Because if she had enough residual ability to cast a starvation curse on an infant, she's not as limited as she presented, Harry said. Right. Which means the surveillance she was supposedly providing, watching you for the order, she could have been doing a lot more than watching. She wrote something. I need to know how many times she interacted with you. Every occasion. Every time she looked after you. Harry thought about this. Mrs. Fig. Cabbage smell and cat photos and the kind of looking after that consisted largely of making a child sit on an uncomfortable sofa being shown slides of her cats. He'd always found her slightly eccentric and completely harmless. She always seemed to not quite like me, he said slowly. Not cruel. Just, like I was an inconvenience. An obligation. Because you were, Hermione said. She'd made you into her object of resentment and also committed herself to keeping you alive. That's a complicated relationship to maintain. She turned a page. The times she interacted with you, did she ever touch you? Physically? Harry thought. She'd sometimes grab my arm when she was steering me somewhere. Nothing, he stopped. Hermione looked at him. She grabbed my arm, he said slowly. Every time. Whenever she took me somewhere or brought me somewhere. She always had me by the arm. Close physical contact, Hermione said. That's how old curse castings of this type are refreshed in some variants. You don't need a full casting if you've already established the curse architecture. You just need contact, Harry said. Brief contact, with intent, she said. I read about it in the secondary literature on the Morsis Codex variants. It's called refreshing the weft. The curse is like a weave, once the initial weave is established, maintaining it requires only occasional touch with magical intent. Her pen was moving fast. Which a functionally squib presenting which could do without anyone noticing. Without a visible wand, without incantation, without any observable magical act. Harry stopped walking. The corridor was empty around them. Moonlight through the windows. The castle's nighttime quiet pressing in. She refreshed them, he said. Every time she looked after me. Every time she grabbed my arm. She was maintaining them. All the way through. While living 2 streets away. While watching over you for the order. While Dumbledore believed the arrangement was purely protective. Hermione looked at him. This is why the later curse castings were harder to trace. She wasn't casting full curses every time. She was refreshing existing structures. The magical signature would be much fainter. Just enough to maintain the weave. How many? Harry said. How many of the 118 are? I need to get this to Reeves immediately, Hermione said. Tonight. If Fig is in Wisteria Walk, if they're preparing a warrant, they need to know the physical contact element before they approach her. If she can refresh curses through touch, she'll try to curse the Aurors who arrest her, Harry said. Or she'll try to run and they won't know what to look for. Hermione was already moving toward the nearest flu-connected room, which was a small staff anteroom on the second floor that she absolutely was not supposed to access at midnight but had known about since third year. Can you go? Harry said. I'll come with you. They reached Reeves at midnight. She answered the flu with the alert, awake quality of someone who has been in the job long enough to sleep lightly, and listened to Hermione's precise and thorough summary without interrupting once. When Hermione finished, Reeves said, "The warrant executes at 6 this morning. I'll brief the team on the physical contact protocol now." She looked through the flu at Harry. "Are you all right, Mr. Potter?" "Getting there," he said. "This is good work," Reeves said, which Harry understood was not routine encouragement from her. "Both of you. This is exceptionally good work." She pulled back. "Get some sleep. I'll send word as soon as the arrest is complete." The flu went dark. Harry sat on the floor of the anteroom with his back against the wall, which was not a dignified posture but was an honest one. Hermione sat beside him. The room was small and slightly dusty and smelled of old parchment. "You all right?" she said, which was the same question Reeves had asked and meant something different coming from Hermione. "She looked after me," Harry said. "As a kid. When the Dursleys went out. She looked after me and the whole time," he stopped. "I thought she was just strange and a bit boring. I felt sorry for her, actually. The cats and the lonely house and the slides. I felt sorry for her and she was," he didn't finish. "I know," Hermione said. I'm not devastated by it," he said, checking as he said it and finding it true. "I think I used up devastation on Doge. Or maybe he thought about it. Maybe it's that I'm starting to see the shape of it and the shape makes sense. Not in a way that's okay. In a way that's explicable." She was bitter about what she'd lost. She took it out on a kid. She told herself it was prudent. People do that. He looked at the dark flu. It doesn't make it less terrible. It just makes it human. Which is almost worse. Hermione was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly right, and I also think it's a very sophisticated way to think about it, and I'm not sure I'd be as clear-headed in your position." "You'd be doing exactly what you're doing now," he said. "Chasing the truth. You'd just also probably be crying." She made a dignified sound. "I'm not going to confirm that. You don't have to." He pushed himself up from the floor. "Come on. Reeves told us to sleep." "She doesn't have authority over our sleep schedules," Hermione said, standing. "No, but Pomfrey does, and those two have been communicating, so, point taken," Hermione said. "Good night, Harry." "Night, Hermione." The arrest happened at 6:12 in the morning. Harry knew the exact time because Reeves sent a Patronus, a large, precise moving hawk that arrived in the Gryffindor boys' dormitory and delivered its message in Reeves's voice. Arabella Figg apprehended at 6:12. No resistance. She knew we were coming. Evidence secured. Come to the ministry at your convenience today, not urgently, have breakfast first. That last part was specifically added. Harry was certain of it. Reeves had assessed him over the course of the investigation and understood something about the way he needed things and delivered accordingly. He lay in bed for a moment, looking at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the other boys sleeping. Ron was making a sound that was technically snoring but had the quality of something architectural, something load-bearing. He thought about Arabella Figg in a ministry holding room. Small, gray-haired, surrounded by official walls. The cat photos she probably still had on her walls in Wisteria Walk, the uncomfortable sofa, the terrible slides. A woman who had spent decades compressing her resentment into something manageable and then deploying it, carefully, through the simple act of grabbing a child's arm. He thought about his 4-year-old self, sitting on that sofa, politely looking at pictures of cats, not knowing. He did not feel sorry for her. He had made himself check, and found only the clean, steady anger that had become his constant companion these past weeks, and underneath it something that was not forgiveness but was perhaps the beginning of the understanding that would be required before forgiveness could even be a question. He got up. He dressed. He went down to breakfast alone because it was early and the common room was empty, and he sat in the great hall at a mostly empty table and ate the full breakfast that Pomfrey's plan prescribed, alone in the morning quiet, watching the enchanted ceiling which was showing the same cold blue-gray sky that had been there all week. He thought about the hearing in 5 days. About Sirius. He thought about the animagus meditation he'd been attempting in the mornings before the sessions with McGonagall, sitting in the window of the 4th-floor classroom, still and quiet, looking for the interior form that the book described. He hadn't found it yet, not fully, but there was something at the edge of it. Something that moved when he looked directly at it and settled when he looked sideways. An impression of size, of speed, of a particular quality of grace. He drank his coffee and waited for the morning to arrive. He went to the ministry mid-morning, alone. Reeves met him in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, which was simultaneously more chaotic and more purposeful than he'd expected, people moving fast with the air of a team that had just executed something significant and was processing the aftermath. She took him to a small conference room and laid it all out. Figg had not resisted. She'd opened the door at 6 in the morning, already dressed, and looked at the Aurors with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a knock for a long time and is almost relieved to hear it. She'd said, "I wondered when you'd get there." Then she'd gone with them without requiring cuffs. "She's talking," Reeves said, sitting across from Harry. "Freely. She wants it on record. All of it. Her account of the initial casting, the subsequent refreshments, the arrangement with Doge." She paused. "She's not exactly remorseful. She's something more complicated than that. She believes she was right and is simultaneously aware that she wasn't." "Cognitive dissonance," Harry said. Reeves looked at him. "You're 15. "I've read a lot lately," Harry said. "She's given us a complete timeline," Reeves continued. "The first casting was indeed in the early hours of November 1st, 1981, before Hagrid departed Godric's Hollow. She had been present in the village. She'd been monitoring the Potters as a self-appointed protective measure, she claims, though her testimony makes clear it was surveillance born of resentment as much as protection. She looked at the file on the table. She cast the foundational curse structure, 5 curses in that initial session. Everything else was built on that foundation. Over the following years, both she and Doge added to it. Doge adding new castings when he visited with Dumbledore's clearance, Figg refreshing and expanding the existing structure through physical contact whenever she cared for you. They didn't coordinate, Harry said. No. She confirms they did not. They had independent knowledge of the curses and independent motivation and happened to be operating on the same target. Reeves looked up from the file. Which is, in some ways, more disturbing than a coordinated conspiracy. Because it means the magical world generates this independently, Harry said. 2 separate people, 2 separate fears, same response. Yes. She held his gaze. I want you to know, the investigation is not finished. We'll continue examining who knew what and when. There may be additional charges, potentially against others who had knowledge and failed in their duty to report. She let this sit for a moment. The ministry itself may come under scrutiny for how its protocols allowed this to occur. You mean fudge, Harry said. I mean, Reeves said carefully, the systems that Fudge has overseen, and the oversight failures those systems represent. Her expression was precise. Fudge has been resistant to certain aspects of this investigation. He has made several attempts to manage its scope and pace. So far those attempts have been unsuccessful. She looked at him directly. I intend for them to remain unsuccessful. Harry believed her. The charges against Fig, he said. 113 counts of dark curse use on a minor, the 5 initial castings plus the full extent of her refreshment activities as documented by the physical evidence and her own testimony. Additionally, fraud and misrepresentation of magical status, the squib claim, and breach of order protective protocols, though that last one is complicated by the order's unofficial status. She turned a page. She's looking at a significant Azkaban sentence. Longer than Doge, because her activities spanned the full period and because the initial castings were more severe. She knows this. She knows. She doesn't appear to be surprised by it. As I said, she was almost expecting us. Harry thought about this. About someone living for 25 years with the weight of what they'd done, walking the same streets, watching a boy grow up through a window, maintaining the machinery of his diminishment. He thought about what it would cost, carrying something like that. He thought about whether it was worse or better that she'd felt the cost and done it anyway. I want to see her, he said. Reeves went very still. That is, not now. Not today. I know there's a process, I know the investigation needs to run, I know there are legal considerations. He looked at her steadily. After. When it's over. When it's done. I want to sit across from her and ask her something. What would you ask? Reeves said. Not blocking it. Curious. Harry thought about it honestly. I'd ask her if it worked, he said. If it went the way she planned. If I'm what she was afraid of anyway. He paused. Because I want her to know the answer. Reeves looked at him for a long moment. I'll see what can be arranged, she said. In time. He was back at Hogwarts by early afternoon. McGonagall was in her office when he came past, door open, and she looked up at him over her reading glasses and did a quick, professional assessment of his face. You've had a morning, she said. Fig was arrested, he said. She set her reading down. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, Come in. Sit down. He sat. The cat, a different one from the one he'd drenched, apparently, regarded him from the windowsill with professional neutrality. Are you all right? McGonagall said. I keep being asked that, Harry said. Because people keep meaning it, she said, without any softness, in the tone of someone stating a fact. He thought about the question honestly, as he'd been doing lately, because it deserved honesty. Yes, he said. I am. I keep expecting to not be, and then I check and I am. He looked at his hands on his knees. I think the thing I feel most right now is, impatient. Like there's this whole version of myself that's been waiting and I keep getting glimpses of it and I want to just, get there. Stop healing by degrees and just arrive. That is an entirely natural feeling, McGonagall said, and also something you should be suspicious of. He looked up at her. The desire to be finished with healing, she said, is often the thing that prevents it. You cannot arrive anywhere by trying to skip the distance between here and there. You walk it. She looked at him with the steady, unsentimental care of a teacher who has been watching a student for 5 years. You are doing the walking. You are doing it faster and more effectively than I would have predicted. But don't mistake speed for completion. He thought about this. Okay. That said, she reached into her desk drawer and produced the Animagus book. How far have you gotten? He blinked at the change of direction, then smiled slightly. Chapter 7. The Visualization Sequences. And there's something there, he said. When I do the meditation. I can't see it clearly yet. It moves when I try to focus on it directly. He paused. It's big. Whatever it is, it's large. Something shifted in McGonagall's expression. A very small thing, controlled almost entirely, but there. He filed it. Keep working on it, she said. Don't force it. Just observe. She tapped the book with one finger. It'll come when you stop trying to make it. He took the book. Tomorrow morning. Sharp at 6. She returned to her reading. And eat dinner tonight. All of it. Pomfrey's orders, he said. Mine too, she said. Thursday, one day before the serious hearing. The common room was full after dinner, humming with the week's accumulated energy, homework being done in clusters, Seamus and Dean conducting an argument about Quidditch that had been ongoing since Tuesday, Neville tending to something in a pot by the window that smelled interesting in a way that was not entirely reassuring. Ginny found Harry in the chair by the fire. She didn't approach from the front or announce herself, she came around the side and simply folded herself into the chair's arm and looked at the fire alongside him, which was a very effective way to have a conversation without it feeling like a confrontation. Tomorrow, she said. Yeah. How do you feel about it? He looked at the fire. Terrified, he said, which was the honest answer he hadn't said to anyone else. Not of the hearing. Of, what if something goes wrong? What if the evidence isn't enough? What if Fudge can't stop this one, Ginny said. Mum's been writing to every Wisengamot contact she has, which is more than you'd expect because she grew up with half of them. Dad's been working the ministry floor for 2 weeks. Bones is running point. She paused. And Dumbledore is providing pensive memories and personally testifying. Even Fudge isn't stupid enough to obstruct Albus Dumbledore testifying for Sirius Black in front of a full session. He might be, Harry said. He's not, she said. Certain in the way she always was. Sirius is coming home, Harry. He looked at her sideways. The firelight was warm on her face, and she was looking straight ahead with the clear and uncomplicated certainty that was so entirely Ginny he didn't know how he'd ever not found it remarkable. What will you do? She said. After. When he's out. He hadn't let himself think this far. He made himself think it now. I don't know yet, he said. I know I want to, I know I can live with him. That he'd be my guardian properly. That's the obvious, he stopped. I also don't know who I am yet without all of it. Without the weight of it. I'm still figuring that out. That seems right, Ginny said. You should probably figure it out. Any suggestions? She looked at him. Something in the look was direct in a way that was different from her usual directness, calibrated, aware of itself. Several, she said. But I'll let you get there in your own time. The fire crackled. The common room hummed. Ginny stayed where she was, her shoulder warm against his, not performing anything, just present, and Harry sat in the firelight and let himself be where he was instead of where he was trying to get to. After a while Ron came over, sat on the floor in front of the fire, and said, I've been thinking. God help us, Ginny said. Hilarious. No, about the morning after the hearing. When Sirius is out. Mum wants to throw a party at the Burrow. He looked at Harry. She's already started cooking. I'm just warning you. It's going to be significant. Harry looked at the fire. He thought about Sirius. About the letter with the 4 lines, the handwriting with its forward lean, the last line, I'm already eating better. He thought about what family meant, not the architecture of it, the legal shape, the blood connection that Petunia had used as the minimum viable justification for keeping him alive. But the actual thing. The Burrow on a good evening. The noise of it. The specific warmth of Molly Weasley's kitchen. Tell her yes, he said. Tell her to make it significant. Ron nodded, satisfied. Ginny's shoulder stayed warm against his. The fire did what fires do. At 10 that evening, Harry sat in the window of the fourth-floor classroom alone, doing the animagus meditation. He'd been sitting for 20 minutes. The castle was quiet. The moon was up and clear, coming in through the open window, and the cold was the pleasant, clarifying kind that sharpened everything. He breathed slowly. He let his magic settle in him the way it did now, present and vast and patient, the river rather than the bucket. He followed the meditation sequence from the book, release the deliberate focus, allow the peripheral sense, observe without pursuing. The interior form moved at the edge of his awareness. He held still. He did not pursue it. It came forward slightly. He could feel the shape of it, large, yes, powerful, and something else. A quality he hadn't been able to name before but could almost name now. Something that combined the aerial ease he felt on a broomstick with the specific, grounded patience he'd been developing over the past weeks. Something that was both high and far-sighted and enormously quick. He did not grab for it. He let it be there. It stayed. For the first time since he'd started the meditation, it stayed. And in the stillness of the classroom with the moonlight on the stone floor, Harry sat in the company of himself, his actual self, the undiminished, uncursed, unconstrained version, and felt, clearly and without question, that he was going to be all right. Not fixed. Not finished. Not at the destination. Just, all right. Moving toward something. On his own feet, with his eyes open. Tomorrow, serious. Tonight, this. He sat in the moonlight and breathed and let the interior form settle at the edge of him like something that had always been there waiting, patient as only wild things know how to be, for the moment it would be seen. Chapter 6, The Open Sky. The morning of the serious hearing, Harry woke before his alarm. He lay in the dark of the dormitory for a moment, listening to Ron's breathing and the castle's early sounds, wind against stone, the distant movement of something in the grounds, a bird starting up somewhere near the Ollery. The weight he'd been carrying since the night in the hospital wing, which was not the same weight as the one he'd carried before, but a different, more honest kind, the weight of knowing and understanding rather than not knowing and enduring, felt different this morning. Lighter. Not gone, but shifted into something he could move with. He dressed quietly. He went down to the kitchen. He knew the route now, the pear, the tickling, and the house elves produced a full breakfast at 6 in the morning without blinking, because house elves operated outside the standard concept of inconvenient timing. He sat alone at the kitchen table and ate everything, which was not an act of discipline anymore but simply what his body wanted and he gave it. He ate and looked at the warm stone walls and the copper pots and thought about nothing in particular, which was itself a kind of progress. Ron appeared at 6:30. He was not dressed yet, hair doing something extraordinary, and he stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Harry and the full breakfast and said, "Good," in a tone that covered everything. He sat down. An elf produced his breakfast. They ate together in the warm kitchen quiet. Hermione came at 7, already dressed, her bag already over her shoulder, her hair nearly under control. She looked at the two of them and sat down and accepted tea and opened a folded parchment she'd been carrying and reviewed it once, then folded it back up. "What's that?" Ron said. "Notes," she said. "I won't need them. But I like having them." "Notes for what?" "For the hearing." She looked at him over her teacup. "In case anything goes wrong. In case someone presents an argument incorrectly and I need to." "You're not testifying," Ron said. "I know that," she said, with dignity. Harry looked at them both and felt the warmth of it, uncomplicated and specific in his. These two people, at 6 in the morning, showing up the way they always showed up, in their own completely distinct ways. Ron present and solid and wordless in the important moments. Hermione prepared for every contingency including the ones she couldn't control. Both of them here, in this kitchen, because Sirius Black was going to be freed today and Harry mattered to them enough to be here for the morning before it. "Thank you," he said. "Not for anything specific. For all of it." Ron ate a sausage. "Shut up," he said, which meant "you're welcome" in the language Ron used for things he felt strongly about. Hermione wrapped both hands around her teacup. "You're welcome," she said precisely, which was Hermione being herself, which was also everything. Fred and George were in the ministry atrium when Harry arrived at 9. They were wearing their best robes, which were still somehow louder than anyone else's, and they were in the middle of a conversation with Amelia Bones that appeared to be going well. Bones was not smiling, but her expression had the quality of someone who finds something amusing and is choosing not to act on it. "Harry," Fred said, arriving at his side with the speed of someone who was watching the door. "We came," George said. "I see that," Harry said. "We brought," Fred reached into his pocket and produced, somehow, a slightly rumpled banner that unfolded to reveal the words "Free Pad Food" in large gold letters. "You can't bring that in," Hermione said, arriving behind Harry. "Technically, definitely not," Bones said, appearing at Harry's other side with the decisive air of someone closing a discussion. "Mr. Weasley, both Mr. Weasleys, I appreciate the sentiment. The banner stays in your pocket." She shook Harry's hand. "Ready?" "Yes," he said. "The evidence is strong. Dumbledore's testimony is airtight. Pettigrew's confirmed testimony from custody, he attempted a plea deal, incidentally, which means he gave us everything, destroys the original prosecution." She looked at him directly. "Fudge has attempted 3 separate procedural delays in the last 48 hours. All were denied." Something moved in her expression that wasn't quite satisfaction but was adjacent. "He's out of options. What about the Wisengamot members who might be swayed by politics rather than evidence?" She met his eyes. "I've had private conversations. The balance has shifted significantly. The investigation into your case," she paused. "The exposure of what the system allowed to happen to you has produced, let us say, a corrective appetite. There are people in that chamber today who want to be seen doing the right thing. We're going to let them." Harry understood what she was doing, giving him the honest picture, neither optimistic nor cautious, just real. He'd noticed she did this consistently. He appreciated it every time. "Let's go," he said. The Wisengamot chamber felt different this time. Harry sat in the gallery, proper gallery, not the accused chair, not the witness stand, between Ron and Hermione, with Fred and George 2 rows back and Reeves at the prosecution table below and Bones at the counsel table. The public gallery was packed. This hearing had made the Prophet 3 days running, and the wizarding public had opinions, as the wizarding public always did, deployed in the form of attendance. Dumbledore was already seated at the testimony table. He'd arrived early and was sitting with his hands folded and his eyes forward, wearing his formal robes, deep blue, silver embroidery, with the weight of someone who has made peace with what today requires. Fudge was in the Chief Warlock's chair again, which was wrong. Bones had objected and been overruled on a technicality. He looked worse than at the previous hearing. Less pompous, more defensive, which made him more honest-looking than he usually managed. The bailiff opened the side door. Sirius Black walked into the Wisengamot chamber. He was thin. Harry had known he would be, the photograph from last year's Prophet, the years in Azkaban, but seeing it in the chamber light, in the formal context, made it different. Thin and grey-streaked and moving with the particular care of someone managing multiple sources of pain simultaneously. But he walked straight. His chin was up. His eyes, when they moved across the gallery, were dark and sharp and present in a way that Harry recognized as the essential Sirius, unchanged, unextinguished. He found Harry in the gallery. He stopped walking for half a second. Just half. Then he continued, sat in the seat the bailiff indicated, and looked forward. But in that half-second, something passed between them, an acknowledgement too large for expression, too real for performance. Something that said, "I'm here." And answered, "I know. I know you are." Harry sat very still and breathed. The hearing took 4 hours. Bones was methodical and thorough. She laid out the timeline of the original prosecution, no trial, no testimony, 13 years imprisoned on evidence that was never formally examined. She presented Pettigrew's confession, which had been given in exchange for ministry protection and which the chamber heard in pensive projection, Pettigrew's rat face and wheedling voice delivering the truth about Godric's Hollow with the cowardly precision of someone saving themselves. She presented the Muggle witnesses from the street, 3 of them now elderly, their memories supported by magical affidavit, testimony confirming that Pettigrew had staged his own death, that the explosion had originated from Pettigrew's wand, not Sirius's. Then Dumbledore testified. He spoke for 45 minutes without notes. He described the night of October 31, 1981. He described what he knew of the secret keeper arrangement, that James and Lily had switched at the last minute, that the switch had been Pettigrew's idea, that Sirius had not been the secret keeper when Voldemort found the Potters. He offered the pensive memory of his own arrival at Godric's Hollow. He offered a second memory, his meeting with Sirius in the aftermath, which made the chamber go very quiet, because what it showed was a man in grief, a man who had just lost his best friends and been told his other best friend had betrayed them, a man in shock rather than a man with guilt. He did not look at Fudge during his testimony. Fudge looked at everything except Dumbledore. When the testimony finished, Bones made her final statement with the economy of someone who knows the case is won and doesn't need to perform it. 3 minutes. Clean and precise as a surgical cut. The Wizengamot deliberated for 22 minutes. Harry counted. He sat in the gallery and counted the minutes and listened to the sounds of the chamber, the shuffle of robes, the murmur of the gallery, the absolute stillness of Sirius Black in the seat below, not moving, hands on his knees, chin still up, waiting with the specific endurance of someone who has survived 13 years and understands that 22 minutes is not very long. Fred and George, 2 rows back, were unusually quiet. Ron had his knee pressed against Harry's without appearing to notice he was doing it. Hermione was rigid with controlled tension, which for Hermione was the equivalent of anyone else vibrating with anxiety. The deliberators returned. The chamber went silent so fast the transition was almost physical. In the matter of Sirius Orion Black, the deliberation chief said, a small woman named Wetherington whom Harry had noticed said everything at the exact same volume and pitch regardless of content, charged on revised proceedings with the murder of 12 Muggles and 1 Peter Pettigrew. The Wizengamot finds the defendant. The chamber was holding its breath. Not guilty on all charges. All charges are hereby vacated. Restitution proceedings will be opened by the ministry within 60 days, the rest was lost. The gallery erupted. Not chaos, something more genuine than chaos. The sound of 200 people releasing something simultaneously. Harry heard it from inside a specific stillness, the way you sometimes hear very loud things from a very quiet center. He heard it and looked at Sirius, who had put his face in his hands, which was the first time Harry had seen his composure break, and which was therefore the most human thing Harry had ever seen anyone do in a Wizengamot chamber. Ron said something that got lost in the noise. Hermione had tears running down her face and was absolutely not acknowledging them. Fred and George, behind them, had unfurled the banner and were holding it up, and Bones, below, looked up at it and closed her eyes briefly in what was either exasperation or relief or both. Harry stood up. He didn't shout. He didn't wave or perform. He stood up in the gallery and looked down at Sirius and waited for the man to lift his face from his hands. Sirius looked up. Found Harry. And smiled, full and raw and nothing like any expression Harry had seen from him before, none of the performative charm or the bitter edge or the haunted quality. Just the smile, enormous and real, directed entirely at Harry. Harry pressed his hand flat against his chest. A gesture he'd never made before and hadn't planned. Sirius looked at it and then back at Harry's face, and something in his expression went absolutely steady. They met in the corridor outside the chamber. The crowd was moving in every direction. Officials and reporters and ministry workers and members of the public, a human tide, noisy, celebratory, carrying its arguments and its emotions. Harry moved through it with the focused ease he'd been developing for weeks, finding the direct line through the crowd, not pushed or pulled by it. Sirius was standing near a stone pillar with Reeves and a ministry official on either side, signing things, release documentation, Harry assumed. He looked up when Harry came through the crowd and the ministry official said something about needing just one more signature and Sirius said, without looking away from Harry, in a moment, and stepped past both of them. They stood in front of each other. Sirius looked at him. Really looked, the way Pomfrey had in the hospital wing, the inventory of damage, except Sirius wasn't looking for curse markers. He was looking at Harry and seeing him, all of him, the same way you look at something you've been afraid might not exist when you finally get to see it. Harry looked back. "You're taller than I expected," Sirius said. His voice was rough. "Pomfrey says I might get a bit more," Harry said. "I heard," Sirius said. "I heard all of it. The whole, I had a lot of time to read the letters that were sent. In wherever they were keeping me." He stopped. His jaw worked. "Harry. What was done to you, is being addressed," Harry said. "It's all out. All of it." He paused. "You don't need to, I do," Sirius said. "I do need to." He looked at Harry with the directness of someone who has had 13 years to figure out what they would say and is now discovering the words are harder than the thinking. "I should have been there. I should have. I was supposed to be your godfather and I wasn't there, and what happened in that house, you were in Azkaban," Harry said. "Wrongly. That's not yours." "No. But before that, the night of," he stopped himself. "Regrets are for later," he said, and his voice recovered something, a decision in it. "I was told you wanted to live with me. When things are, when we've sorted the guardianship." "Yes," Harry said. Simply. "And you want that," Sirius said, not doubtfully but checking, needing to hear it clearly. "Actually want it. Not because it's the obvious move, not because there's no other option, because I want it," Harry said. "Because you're my family. The actual kind." He looked at Sirius steadily. "I've spent this month figuring out what that word means. And you're it." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through his face, all of it, all the years and the grief and the guilt and the wanting and the surviving, and came out the other side as something simpler. He stepped forward and put his arms around Harry. Harry stood in the middle of the ministry corridor with Sirius's arms around him, and the crowd moved past on all sides, and Hermione and Ron and Fred and George were somewhere nearby being deliberately unobserving, and he didn't count the seconds or measure the duration or perform anything. He just stood there and let himself be held by someone who was holding him because they loved him, and felt the specific, irreplaceable sensation of what it meant to have that and know it was real. "All right," Sirius said into the top of his head. "All right." "Yeah," Harry said. "We are." The burrow that evening was exactly what Ron had promised. Molly Weasley had cooked for approximately 14 people and there were 11 present, which meant the table was a landscape of excess and generosity in the specific Weasley key. Every surface had something on it. The kitchen smelled like roasting and warmth and the particular, distinctive burrow smell that Harry had always associated with the concept of somewhere safe. Sirius sat at the table and looked at it like someone rediscovering a sense they'd lost. Arthur sat across from him and they talked about things that had nothing to do with Azkaban or the hearing or the investigation, Muggle aeroplanes, which Arthur was still fascinated by, and the specific mechanical logic of a motorcycle engine, which Sirius knew extensively and Arthur didn't, and both of them found this an excellent subject. Harry watched them and felt something warm and simple. Molly put a plate in front of Harry and said, "Eat," in the tone that was not a suggestion, and then put her hand briefly on the back of his head in a way that was not dramatic but was absolute, and moved on to the next person. Harry ate. Fred and George had set up something in the garden that produced colorful sparks at irregular intervals, which Ginny described as a calibration failure and Fred described as a design feature and George declined to comment on. Percy was present, stiff in his ministry robes, making an obvious effort that everyone was making a corresponding obvious effort to appreciate. Bill and Charlie had come from wherever they'd been with the speed of people who had received a sufficiently important owl. Ron was telling Sirius about the Quidditch season with the enthusiasm of someone who has found a new audience. Sirius was listening with genuine attention and offering commentary that revealed he had strong opinions about keeper tactics specifically, which made Ron's face go through several rapid updates. Hermione sat beside Harry and was reading something under the table in the way she always did at Weasley gatherings when the noise level exceeded her comfortable threshold, which was not antisocial but just Hermione, and Harry had always found it quietly endearing. Ginny came and sat on Harry's other side. She had a butterbeer and she put her feet up on the empty chair across from her and looked at the garden where Fred Sparks were doing something episodic. "Good day," she said. "Yeah," he said. "How's he doing?" She nodded at Sirius, who was currently being persuaded by Ron to express an opinion on whether Puddlemere United's new formation was viable. "Better than expected," Harry said. He's going to be all right. It'll take time but he paused. "He's serious." "He's not." He didn't have the right word for what serious was, the specific quality of a person who has survived the unsurvivable and come out the other side still recognizably themselves. "He's going to be all right," he said again, because that said the important thing. "You both are," Ginny said. Not as a prediction. As a fact. The way she said most things. He looked at her, and she was looking at the garden, and the firelight from inside was catching the edges of her hair, and Harry thought, now. Not because the moment was perfect or because he'd planned it or because some external circumstance made it the right time. Just because it was true and he'd been carrying the truth of it long enough that carrying it had started to feel dishonest. "Ginny," he said. She looked at him. He stopped, then decided against the preamble. "I like you," he said. He stopped again, then decided against qualifications too. "I like you. I think I've liked you for a while and I've been looking at it from the wrong angle." She looked at him for a moment. Her expression didn't perform anything, not surprise, not calculation, not the performance of being moved. Just the direct, clear quality of Ginny Weasley processing something true. "I know," she said. "You knew." "For about 3 weeks," she said. "You're not as subtle as you think you are, Potter." He laughed, short and genuine. "That's fair." He looked at her. So, she said, and there was something warm in the word, decided. "Yes. Obviously yes." She tilted her head slightly. "You had to say it, though." "I wasn't going to say it for you." "Obviously not," he said. She smiled, the real one, not the performed one, not the sharp ironic one she deployed casually. The one that changed the whole architecture of her face and was, Harry thought, one of the best things he'd ever seen. "Good," she said. "Good," he agreed. Ron, 3 seats down, said, "If you two are done being weird, Sirius wants to know your opinion on Puddlemere," which established definitively that Ron had been paying attention and had chosen to deploy his tact at full capacity, which was a generous act. Ginny threw a bread roll at him. He caught it and ate it. After dinner, when the evening had mellowed into the particular warmth of a gathering finding its natural end, Harry and Sirius walked out into the Burrows' garden. The sparks had gone out. The night was clear, a rarity for Scotland, but they were in Devon and the sky was showing everything, stars from horizon to horizon in the way you only get far enough from cities. The garden smelled like late summer and something floral that Harry had never identified and never needed to. They walked without deciding to walk, just moved out through the garden gate and along the field edge in the easy company of people who don't need to structure their time together. "Reeves briefed me," Sirius said. "On the whole investigation. Doge, Fig, he stopped. His jaw worked. "Dumbledore." Harry looked at him sideways. And I'm working through my feelings about several of those people," Sirius said, with a controlled precision that suggested the feelings were complex and not entirely resolved. "Doge especially. He stopped again. He was at every order meeting. He had access to everything. He was supposed to be, I knew him. I thought I knew him. Fear makes people do unexpected things, Harry said, and heard himself say it and recognized that he was quoting something, not from a book, from the last month of his own processing. That's very generous of you, Sirius said, with a slight edge. It's not generous, Harry said. It's just, accurate. I'm still angry. I'll probably be angry for a long time. But angry and accurate can coexist. He looked up at the stars. I've been working on that. Sirius was quiet for a moment. You've been doing a lot of work this month. Yeah. McGonagall says, he paused. I got a letter from her. Unsolicited. She wrote to tell me about the morning sessions and the recalibration and, he stopped. She wanted me to know what I was walking into. What you are now, magically speaking. He looked at Harry. She doesn't hand out assessments like that lightly. I know, Harry said. She said, Sirius said carefully, that she had never in her career encountered a student whose raw magical capacity was in the range yours is currently demonstrating and still increasing. He looked at Harry. I want to ask about it but I also don't want to make it a thing. Ask, Harry said. What does it feel like? Harry thought about how to answer this honestly. He thought about the morning sessions, the stone bench becoming an oak tree in 4 seconds, the agumenti that had drenched the fireplace, the Quidditch dive that had silenced the crowd. He thought about the Patronus he'd always cast most easily, the stag that had driven back 100 Dementors at 13. Like myself, he said. It feels like myself. Which I know sounds, no, Sirius said. That's exactly right. His voice was rough again, and Harry recognized the roughness for what it was, not sadness but the particular emotion of someone who wanted something for someone they loved and knows it has finally arrived. James always said, he stopped. Started again. Your father always said that his magic felt like an extension of himself. Like it was as natural as breathing. He said most people had to reach for their magic and he never did, it was just, there. He looked at Harry. I wondered if you'd have that. Given what was done to you, I wondered if it would be, damaged, Harry said. Diminished, Sirius said. Permanently. Pomfrey says no, Harry said. She says the curse damage is entirely reversible, all of it, that the suppression was external rather than structural, the curses interfered with the expression of my magic, not with the magic itself. It was always there. Just, he paused. Behind a wall they built. And now the wall's coming down. Most of it, Harry said. Still going. He paused. McGonagall started me on animagus theory. Sirius stopped walking. Harry stopped beside him. Looked at him. Sirius looked back. And the expression on his face was something Harry couldn't fully classify, layered and moving and complicated in a way that involved James Potter and a shared dormitory and a night of dangerous magic and 20 years of grief and this moment, right here, in a Devon field under a clear sky. The animagus meditation, Harry said. When I do it, the interior form. He paused. It's large. And fast. And when I try to look at it directly it moves, but when I, let it come, Sirius said. His voice was very quiet. Yeah. Have you seen the shape of it at all? Any detail? Harry thought about the meditation sessions. The moonlight on stone, the thing at the edge of awareness, the impression of size and speed and the specific quality he'd been trying to name for 2 weeks. He'd been reading about animagus forms, what they meant, how they related to the person, what the connection between inner self and outward form revealed. He'd been thinking about his Patronus. About the stag. About his father. I don't know yet, he said. Not clearly. But, he looked up at the sky. I have a feeling. Sirius followed his gaze upward. They stood in the field under the enormous Devon sky and neither of them said anything for a moment, which was comfortable in the specific and particular way of people who are genuinely at ease with each other. Then Sirius said, quietly, he'd be, and stopped. Harry waited. He'd be so, Sirius stopped again. Tried a third time. Your dad would be, I know, Harry said. I'm not sure you do, Sirius said. I'm not sure there are words for what he would be, seeing you right now. Standing here. After everything. Harry looked at the stars. He thought about a man he knew only through photographs and pensive memories and other people's stories, a man with untidy hair and a fondness for transfiguration and a laugh that everyone described as though they could still hear it clearly, who had loved a red-haired girl and his friends and his son in the 31 years he'd had, and had spent those 31 years apparently loving all of it at full volume without qualification. I think he'd probably have something to say about the animagus progress, Harry said. Sirius made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent. He'd have turned it into a competition immediately, he said. He'd have been insufferable. Good, Harry said. Terrible, Sirius agreed. The absolute worst about it. They both smiled at the sky. The following week moved with the different quality of an aftermath. The investigation continued, it would continue for months, Reeves had told him, because the systemic questions it raised about ministry oversight and order protocols were not resolvable in a few weeks. But the acute portion was done. Doge was in custody. Fig was in custody. The Dursleys were serving the early portion of their sentences. Dumbledore had made full disclosure to the investigation team and was cooperating entirely. Fudge was under scrutiny from 3 separate Wisengamot oversight committees and had the look of a man watching his career dissolve and knowing there was nothing he could do about it. The guardianship paperwork for Sirius was filed Thursday and expedited, Bones's office again, pulling the right strings, making things move. Harry read the document when it arrived, the formal language of it, the legal transfer of responsibility. He signed it with a steadiness of hand that felt appropriate. He owed the signed copy back with a note that said simply, done. When can you move in? Sirius's reply came by return owl, within the hour, already looking at properties near Hogsmeade. Your room will be the best one. Obviously. Fred and George's fund proposal had been taken up by Hermione with the intensity of someone who had found a project perfectly matched to her specific combination of passion and methodological rigor. She'd drafted a proposal document within 48 hours, 32 pages, 3 appendices, and sent it simultaneously to Fred and George, Amelia Bones, and 2 members of the Wisengamot who had expressed interest in systemic reform following the case's public visibility. She reported back to Harry on this with the satisfaction of someone who has aimed something precisely. Will it work? Harry asked. The diagnostic fund? Yes, she said. Not immediately. These things take time legally and politically. But the framework is sound, the funding is committed, and the political appetite is there. She looked at him. In 5 years, every magical child from a Muggle household will be scanned on arrival at magical school. What happened to you will be detectable from the moment they set foot in the system. Harry sat with this. The specific, strange feeling of something having mattered beyond itself. Of his own story becoming the reason something changed. Good, he said. Then, thank you, Hermione. Fred and George's money, she said. Your 32 pages, he said. She straightened slightly, which was her version of accepting a compliment. Well, she said. Yes. Friday, 2 weeks after the Sirius hearing. 6 in the morning. The 4th floor classroom, moonlight still present at the edge of the windows, the sky outside just beginning to consider dawn. Harry had been awake for 40 minutes already, which had been his pattern lately, waking early, not anxious, just awake. Ready. He sat in the window and opened the animagus book and read the same passage he'd been sitting with for a week. The interior form, when finally seen clearly, is not a surprise. It is a recognition. The animal you are has always been the animal you were. The meditation does not create the form, it removes the obstacle between you and the seeing of what was always already there. He closed the book. He sat. Breathed. Released the deliberate focus the way he'd learned. Let the peripheral sense come in. Let his magic settle in him, the vast and patient presence of it, and followed the thread of the meditation inward. The interior form came forward. Not sideways this time. Not at the edge. Directly forward, as though it had been waiting for him to stop trying to find it and simply be still enough for it to arrive. He saw it. Large, enormous, actually, the size of a small horse. Four-legged, hooved, moving with a particular economy of power, the kind of movement that implies reserves held back rather than effort expended. Antlers, a full rack, branching wide, carrying the weight of themselves without apparent effort. A coat of dappled brown and gold. Eyes that were amber and clear and looked back at him with something uncannily like recognition. A stag. He looked at it, his interior form, his father's form, the shape his Patronus had always been, the animal he had always been, and it looked back at him without moving, with the patient, grounded presence of something that has been standing in a forest for a very long time waiting to be found. He did not pursue it. He did not grab for it. He just looked. And it looked back. And then something happened that the book had described but that he hadn't fully understood until this moment. The border between observer and observed dissolved, and he understood that the stag was not separate from him, was not a thing he was looking at, but was himself, the actual shape of himself, the form his magic had always wanted to take if given the space. He came back to himself, to the ordinary sense of sitting in a window, hands in his lap, the dawn beginning to come up outside, and sat in the aftermath of it with the specific feeling of having understood something that had always been true and was no longer unknown. He thought about his father. About Sirius. About the map, Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. He thought about a night in a third-floor corridor, a silver stag galloping out of a wand and driving back 100 Dementors, and a 13-year-old boy who had thought he was seeing his father and discovered he was seeing himself. He had always been seeing himself. He was not his father's echo or his mother's son or the boy who lived or the product of anyone's arrangement. He was a stag in the early morning. He was a river without a bucket. He was himself, arriving late at the destination he'd always been heading toward, and now here. He heard the classroom door open. McGonagall, sharp at 6. He turned from the window. She looked at him. She was good at reading faces. 30 years of students had made her fluent in the specific languages of breakthrough and confusion and ordinary tiredness. She read his face now and went very still. "You saw it," she said. "Yeah," Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her expression that she allowed to be there, just allowed it, without managing it or containing it, which from McGonagall was the equivalent of anyone else sitting down and weeping. "Your father," she said softly. "Me," Harry said. She looked at him. "He was himself too," Harry said. "Not my echo. We just happen to be the same." He paused. "I think that's," he thought about the right word. "I think that's good. I think it means we're the same kind of person, not that I'm a copy of him. He had his life and I have mine." He looked at McGonagall. "I'm going to be an animagus." "You are going to be an animagus," she confirmed. "Not immediately. The practical work begins when I judge your core stability sufficient, which is not yet, but not far off," he said. She held his gaze. "No," she said. "Not far off." He stepped down from the window. "What are we working on today?" She produced her wand. "Conjuration at range," she said, moving to the center of the room. "You've been doing transfiguration from objects that are present. Today you're going to conjure from nothing." She looked at him. "Most seventh years can't do this reliably." "Then I'll have to be reliable," Harry said. He raised his wand. She gave him the incantation. He turned it over in his mind, the specific magical logic of creating rather than transforming, the different shape of the intent required. He cast. A silver cup appeared in the air 6 feet in front of him, solid and perfect, rotating slightly, catching the dawn light that had started to come through the windows. McGonagall looked at it. "Do it again," she said. "Faster." He cast again. A second cup appeared, then a third. He suspended all three in the air without being asked and looked at McGonagall with something that was not showing off but was close to it, the honest expression of someone discovering what they can do and finding it exactly as good as hoped. McGonagall looked at the three suspended cups with the expression of a woman who has seen extraordinary things and is seeing one now and knows it and is choosing to be present for it rather than managed about it. "Again," she said. "And this time, maintain the previous three while casting the fourth." He did. The room filled with silver cups turning slowly in the morning light, and outside the windows the dawn was fully arrived now, the Scottish sky going from grey to gold, the castle waking up around them, and Harry Potter stood in the middle of his own becoming and cast, and cast, and cast. Later that morning, sitting on the Quidditch pitch bleachers in the September sun, he wrote 2 letters. The first was to Sirius. It was short, "Found my form last night. You know what it is. Come at the weekend, I want you to be there when McGonagall says I can start the practical work." He thought for a moment and added, "Bring food. The good kind." The second letter was longer. He'd been composing it in his head for 2 weeks and the time had arrived to put it on parchment. It was to Arabella Figg. Not warm, he wasn't there yet and might never be, but honest, which was what he'd decided he owed himself more than he owed her anything. He wrote, "You wanted to know if it worked. If I was diminished enough to be safe by your standards. I want you to have your answer while you have time to sit with it. No. It didn't work. I am not what you were afraid of, I'm something you didn't account for, which is just myself, undamaged as it turns out, arriving late but intact. I don't forgive you. I'm not writing to offer that. I'm writing because you're a person who made choices out of fear and is now sitting with the consequences, and I think you should know the full weight of what you were afraid of, not to punish you, but because you spent 25 years being wrong about me and you deserve to know the shape of the truth. I am James Potter's son and I am Lily Potter's son and I am Sirius Black's godson and I am my own person, and I am going to be an animagus, and I am going to fight a war and I am probably going to win it, and none of that has anything to do with what you did to me. It happened in spite of you. Maybe that's the most honest consequence there is." He read it back. He made one small change, removed a sentence that went too far in one direction, and then sealed it. He'd decide later whether to send it. Maybe he would. Maybe it was enough to have written it. He put both letters in his bag. He sat in the sun on the bleachers and looked at the empty Quidditch pitch, the green of it, the gold goalpost hoops catching the light, the vast open sky above it, the kind of sky that goes up and up with nothing to interrupt it. He thought about flying. About Thursday's morning session and what McGonagall would produce next. About Sirius looking at properties near Hogsmeade, finding the best room. About Hermione's 32-page document making its way through ministry channels with the unstoppable momentum of something that had been correctly aimed. About Ron, who would appear at lunch and sit across from him and eat approximately twice what was reasonable and say nothing important and everything necessary. About Ginny, who had said obviously yes with the directness of someone who had been waiting for him to arrive at his own conclusion and was patient enough to let the arriving happen naturally. About a stag in an early morning classroom, amber eyes, looking back. He was 15 years old and he had been cursed 118 times and he had survived it, and the surviving was not the end of the story, it was barely the beginning. There was a war coming. There was a prophecy with his name in it. There was a dark wizard rebuilding himself in the shadow of everything ordinary and waiting, as dark wizards do, for the right moment. He was not afraid. Not the absence of fear, he knew what that felt like, it felt like numbness, and this was not that. This was the presence of something stronger than fear, which was simply the knowledge of what he was. The clear, unadorned, uncursed truth of his own capability. A river that had found its width. A stag at the edge of a clearing, patient, absolutely sure of what it was and what it could do, waiting for nothing because the moment it occupied was already sufficient. He would fight the war. He would fight it as himself, not managed or diminished or arranged into a shape that made other people comfortable. Just himself. Completely, at full capacity, with no apology. He stood up from the bleachers. He took out his wand, the holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, his wand, which had always been his and had been more fully his in the last month than ever before, and pointed it at the empty pitch. He cast a Patronus, not because he needed one but because it was morning and the sky was clear and he could. The stag burst out of his wand like something that had been waiting for exactly this. It galloped the length of the pitch, enormous and silver and absolutely certain of itself, head up, antlers wide, moving with the specific economy of a creature that contains its own power without effort. It reached the far end of the pitch and turned and galloped back, and then it looked at him. He looked at it. The same eyes. Amber, clear, recognizing. He lowered his wand. The Patronus held for a moment longer than patron uses usually do, as though it too had something to sit with, and then it dissolved gently into the morning air, not gone, just returned to wherever such things live when not called upon. Harry stood on the pitch with his wand at his side and the sun on his face and the sky above him without limit, and breathed. And chose. And was free.